Chapter 4177. The subtle changes in the Azura God Emperor's expression and eyes did not escape Ji Tianxing's notice. He chuckled inwardly as he guessed that the Azura God Emperor had been led to believe the second answer. This way, the suspicion of him possessing the heaven-vanquishing array was lessened. As long as the Azura God Emperor did not have concrete evidence, he could not have incited the other God Emperors to gang up on him and steal the heaven-vanquishing array. While Emperor God Xiaolua was distracted, Ji Tianxing adjusted his aura and divine power to suppress the injuries in his internal organs. Then he launched another attack. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Ji Tianxing swung the Sword of Burial of Heaven with his right hand and unleashed a massive dragon-shaped sword that descended from the sky toward the Azura God Emperor. His left hand swung the hammer and unleashed a barrage of lightning that enveloped the Azura God Emperor for 100 miles before crashing down. The Azura God Emperor immediately regained his composure. Crimson flames erupted from his body as he waved his two fang-like black blades and unleashed a barrage of crimson light. The crimson blades were imbued with boundless killing intent. Not only did they contain the divine power of the 300 laws, but they also contained a wisp of the heavenly Tao. Any other peak god king would have been suppressed by the heavenly Tao and their strength and reflexes would have decreased. But Ji Tianxing was not affected at all. The heavenly Tao's divine power had no effect on him. This was something he had already verified when he fought with the other God Emperor's avatars. Bam bam bam. The divine techniques unleashed by the two clashed fiercely in the void, creating earth-shattering explosions that reverberated through the void. Divine light splashed in all directions as the sword and saber images collapsed. The two were also knocked back 30,000 feet by the powerful recoil. The two unleashed their divine power and clashed 3 more times. Ji Tianxing was finally certain that the avatar of the Azura God Emperor was not as strong as before. It was not that the Azura God Emperor was deliberately hiding his divine power, but that he had expended too much of his energy and his battle prowess was truly declining. With that, Ji Tianxing was relieved. He let out a low roar and his entire body radiated with dazzling golden light as he used the dragon race's ultimate technique. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. In the next moment he expanded more than 1,000 times in the dazzling golden light, turning into a giant golden armored god that was 10,000 feet tall. His entire body was covered in golden dragon scales, which protected him like a suit of armor. Dragon horns also grew out of his forehead, holy and sharp. His battle prowess also soared, explosively increasing by 8 times. Before this, his strength was slightly lacking compared to the Shura God Emperor's avatar. He had to rely on his perfect sword skills and battle experience to fight the Shura God Emperor to a draw. But now he was far more powerful than the Shura God Emperor. He had an overwhelming advantage. Most importantly, even if he exhausted all of his divine power in the battle, he could still find a way to escape and replenish his power. As for the Shura God Emperor's avatar, once it ran out of energy, it would be on the verge of collapse. Seeing Ji Tianxing transform into a 10,000-foot-tall giant and increase his battle prowess by 8 times, the Shura God Emperor's eyes widened in anger and shock. Damned bastard, you're still hiding your strength? You still have a trump card? In all fairness, Ji Tianxing's battle prowess was already shocking enough. The Shura God Emperor could not believe that a peak divine king could be so powerful. But now Ji Tianxing's battle prowess had increased by 8 times. Even the Shura God Emperor could guess that this kind of divine power that could temporarily increase one's battle prowess would not last long. Perhaps it would even have serious side effects. But the fact that Ji Tianxing could wait until now to use this move was beyond his expectations. After all, Ji Tianxing's battle prowess had already surpassed his avatar's. In other words, Ji Tianxing could already erupt with 60 to 70% of his original strength. A peak divine king could actually erupt with 60 to 70% of a god emperor's strength. How frightening was this? The Shura God Emperor's heart was filled with worry. He had to consider a question. Given Long Tian's astonishing rate of growth, wouldn't he be able to break through to the God Emperor realm in a few more decades? The 5 God Emperors were well aware that the God Emperor realm was not something that could be broken through by relying on talent and opportunity. There were already 5 God Emperors in this world, and it was basically impossible for a 6th God Emperor to appear. If a 6th God Emperor were to appear in the future, it would definitely be Long Tian. After all, Long Tian's talent and comprehension were superb, and he was also a lucky fellow blessed by the heavens. The God Emperor realm required one to comprehend and control the power of the heavenly Tao. For a lucky fellow like Long Tian, it was the same as cheating. No. After today, this God Emperor must convince the other four to get rid of Long Tian no matter what. As long as this calamity is not eliminated, we will not be able to rest in peace. This thought flashed through the Shura God Emperor's mind, and he resolved to get rid of Ji Tianxing as soon as possible. At this time, Ji Tianxing once again brandished the Burial of Heaven and the Divine Hammer, launching a ferocious attack. Sword Rain. Heaven-splitting sword. The Burial of Heaven pointed the sword into the depths of the void, and 90,000 stars lit up in the firmament and fell like a meteor shower. This sword divine ability was very powerful, but there was a slight delay after it was released. To deal with an expert like the Shura God Emperor, it could only be used when he was unprepared. If the Shura God Emperor was prepared, he would have teleported tens of thousands of kilometers away before the sword rain fell. As for the other move, Heaven-splitting sword, it was not executed with the Burial of Heaven, but with the Divine Hammer. At Ji Tianxing's level, no matter what kind of weapon he used, it would not affect his ability to use divine techniques. Not to mention the Divine Hammer, even if he was barehanded, he could still use this sword divine ability. A moment later, the Shura God Emperor, who was filled with worry and anxiety, finally came to his senses. He felt the invisible sword intent of the heavens envelop him, as if the heavens were angry and the heavenly Tao was punishing him. He immediately realized that something was wrong. He did not even look up at the sky but teleported backward and retreated. Apart from Ji Tianxing, no other God King could teleport through the void because they did not have the power of space to use and control it. But a God Emperor could do it. After all, a God Emperor could borrow the power of the heavenly Tao. As for why Ji Tianxing could teleport through the void, it was probably because of this. It was just that he could not sense the power of the heavenly Tao, so he could not comprehend it or use it. He could not even obtain the heavenly Tao merit. Whoosh. In the blink of an eye, the Shura God Emperor had teleported 30,000 kilometers away. Originally, he had already escaped the range of the sword rain. But the 90,000 stellar swords had long since locked onto his aura. No matter where he fled, they would follow him. Thus, the 90,000 stellar swords turned around and charged at the Shura God Emperor. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sword light whistled past with incredible speed, catching up to the Shura God Emperor in the blink of an eye and drowning him. Bam bam bam. Then the tens of thousands of stellar swords slammed into the Shura God Emperor, creating a series of dull booms. Chapter 4178. Following a series of muffled sounds, countless fragments of starlight scattered across the void. The Azura God Emperor knew that he couldn't escape the sword rain, so he used all his strength to form a blood flame shield to protect himself. The 6 broad blood-red wings on his back also wrapped around his body tightly. At the same time, he released a surge of divine energy, forming thousands of blood-red blades that circled around his body to form a defensive barrier. With these 3 layers of protection, he was confident that he could withstand the sword rain. Bang 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 bang. Tens of thousands of stellar swords struck the Azura God Emperor one after another, but they were all blocked by the blood-red blades barrier. The blood-red blade barrier shook violently under the onslaught of the stellar swords, and cracks began to appear on its surface. However, the stellar swords were also shattered, scattering countless fragments of starlight. A total of 15,000 stellar swords were shattered by the blade barrier and dissipated into the void. However, the sharp blade barrier was also completely destroyed and disintegrated on the spot. The Azura God Emperor's first line of defense was destroyed by the stellar swords. In the next moment, tens of thousands of stellar swords struck the Azura God Emperor's blood-red shield one after another. This oval-shaped blood-red shield was 10,000 feet tall and 3 inches thick. A thick blood-red color swirled around it and flames soared into the sky. Bang bang bang. Muffled sounds rang out one after another, interspersed with kacha-kacha sounds. That was the sound of the starry greatsword being shattered after hitting the blood-light shield with all its might. Of course, there were also sounds of cracks appearing on the blood-red shield. This time, 25,000 starry swords were consumed before the bloody shield was broken and disintegrated. The Azura God Emperor's second line of defense was also destroyed by the stellar swords. At this point, the Azura God Emperor only had one last line of defense left, and that was his 6 Azura wings that wrapped around his body. Of the 90,000 stellar swords, 40,000 had been used. Only 50,000 remained. The Shura God Emperor's heart was filled with anger and shock. He didn't expect Ji Tianqing's sword arts to be so complex and powerful. Those tens of thousands of starry swords seemed to have intelligence and intelligence. After the first 40,000 great star swords dissipated, the remaining 50,000 great star swords formed a sword formation and attacked him one after another. Swish, swish. The starry swords flew back and forth in the void, interweaving into a sword formation that had a radius of 1,000 miles. They kept a special rhythm and frequency, attacking continuously. Ping ping ping. The great star sword slammed into the Azura God Emperor's blood-colored wings, creating a series of muffled sounds that reverberated endlessly in the void. The Azura God Emperor's body trembled from the bombardment, and his blood-red wings flashed with a dark red light. Even though the Azura God Emperor did his best to circulate his divine energy, flapping his wings to launch a counterattack, he managed to shatter many of the stellar swords. However, 2 of his wings were injured and had been pierced through earlier. Now, under the onslaught of the great star swords, those 2 wings were quickly cut into pieces. The heart-wrenching pain caused the Azura God Emperor to fly into a rage, his eyes filled with blood-red flames. Bastard! Long Tian, this emperor will tear you to pieces. The Azura God Emperor swung his blood-red blades with all his might, blocking the incoming great star swords from all directions. However, there were too many of them. Even though he could destroy dozens of great star swords in a breath's time, he was still hit by more. After 10 breaths, all 50,000 great star swords collapsed, dissipated, or ran out of energy. The dazzling net of great star swords disappeared, and the Azura God Emperor finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, his injuries were even more severe and he looked even more battered. In addition to the 2 destroyed wings, 2 more had been pierced through, leaving behind several bloody wounds. His chest and back also had several new wounds, from which purple blood continuously flowed out. He panted heavily, circulating his energy to suppress his injuries, but his combat strength was also declining. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was unscathed. His golden body showed no signs of injury, and his strength was also at its peak. The Azura God Emperor stared coldly at him, thinking to himself, even if you use a forbidden secret technique to increase your combat strength by 8 times, it's destined that you won't be able to maintain it for long. As long as this emperor can hold on for another 15 minutes, your combat strength will decline and you will suffer a backlash from the secret technique, and your time of death will come. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Ji Tianqing launched another attack. Starry River Break. Ji Tianqing first swung his divine hammer, slashing out a great star sword over 10,000 feet long, slashing towards the Azura God Emperor's head. This great star sword was formed by the convergence of the endless power of the stars. There were hundreds of millions of stars in the void which could provide endless power of the stars. In addition, the 90,000 great star swords had just dissipated, and the surrounding void was filled with a rich amount of star power. Therefore, this divine power, Starry River Break, was the most suitable one. Seeing the great star sword slashing down, the Azura God Emperor remained calm. He waved the nameless blade with both hands, sending out crimson blade auras. Bang bang bang. Ka-ka-ka. Dozens of crimson blade auras clashed with the great star sword, creating a series of muffled booms and shattering sounds. In the blink of an eye, the great star sword was pulverized, and the dozens of crimson blade auras were also disintegrated. The Azura God Emperor had just neutralized Ji Tianqing's attack when another great star sword came crashing down with terrifying divine power. Sort of world annihilation. Without a doubt, this was a secret technique that Ji Tianqing had used after absorbing a vast amount of 5 elemental world energy. This sword was filled with an indomitable, unstoppable and unstoppable aura, and it really did have the power to destroy the world. As the great star sword came crashing down, even the pitch-black void started to ripple, creating layers of ripples. The Azura God Emperor's aura was locked onto by the great star sword, and he found it difficult to breathe and even felt a trace of fear in his heart. This is the power of the world. He sensed that the great star sword's aura was special, and only after carefully sensing it did he realize what it was. His face immediately turned ugly. Despicable guy, he hasn't even broken through to the God Emperor stage, but he has already mastered a special power that is not inferior to the power of the heavenly Tao. Even the five of us can't refine the divine realm or use the power of the world. How did he do it? To be honest, the Azura God Emperor was already feeling a little jealous of Ji Tianxing. Although he didn't know how many miraculous encounters Ji Tianxing had, or how many opportunities and treasures he had obtained, he knew that Ji Tianxing was one of them. This guy must be the chosen one, the lucky one blessed by the heavens. Otherwise, how could a person be so lucky? As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the Azura God Emperor had no choice but to teleport away to avoid the Sword of World Annihilation. However, he was locked onto by the Sword of World Annihilation, and his strength was suppressed, so he couldn't escape fast enough. He had just teleported 20,000 kilometers away when the Sword of World Annihilation caught up to him and struck him. Chapter 4179. Kaboom! The 10,000 zhang long world exterminating sword hit Emperor God Xiu Luo and there was a loud bang. Fortunately, he knew that he couldn't dodge this attack, so he formed a divine power shield in time and raised the two blades above his head. The World Destroyer sword slashed down and struck the two top-grade king-level nameless blades first. With two loud bangs, the two blades buzzed violently and were sent flying, falling into the void 100 miles away. Then the power of World Destroyer sword didn't decrease and it hit Emperor God Xiu Luo's divine power shield. With a loud cracking sound, the blood-red shield was smashed into pieces on the spot, and countless blood-red fragments splashed out. The Azura God Emperor let out a painful groan as he was sent flying hundreds of miles away. While he was still flying, a long trail of purple blood spilled behind him. When he fell into the void 100 miles away, he could clearly see that his left shoulder had almost been cut off. There was a huge wound that split his left shoulder bone in half, leaving only a few thin bones and a few tendons connected to his arm and shoulder. Neatly broken bones could be seen in the hideous wound, and blood gushed out like a fountain. This was the worst injury the Azura God Emperor had suffered since the start of their battle. The pain in his body was nothing, but the deep sense of humiliation and defeat made his body tremble in anger. His entire body was surrounded by bloody flames that soared into the sky. But he didn't roar or shout and he didn't say anything. Because he knew very well that he couldn't beat Ji Tianxing, so no matter what he said he would only be humiliating himself. A moment later he suppressed his anger and calmed himself down. A thought flashed through his mind and he changed his attitude. This is the first time he has used this divine ability since I started fighting with him. From the looks of it, this divine ability should be his trump card, his ultimate secret technique. He used a forbidden technique to increase his combat strength by 8 times in a short time, but it will be over soon. That's why he was so anxious and didn't hold anything back. He just wanted to end the battle as soon as possible. If that's the case, I just need to buy some time until his forbidden technique is over. When his strength declines and he suffers a backlash, won't he be at my mercy? With this thought, the Azura God Emperor was no longer anxious or angry. He reached out and picked up the two blades that fell hundreds of miles away, and hurriedly circulated his energy to suppress his injuries. Ji Tianxing wasn't in a hurry to attack and he wasn't in a hurry either. He was happy to buy time. But unfortunately, Ji Tianxing only paused for 2 breaths of time before attacking again. Emperor God Xiu Luo changed his mind and decided to avoid fighting with Ji Tianxing head-on. Instead he tried to stall him. He wanted to wait until Ji Tianxing's strength declined and counterattack. This move was indeed effective. Although the Azura God Emperor couldn't avoid all of Ji Tianxing's attacks, he did slow down Ji Tianxing's attack frequency and delay Ji Tianxing's rhythm. Time slowly passed. Before he knew it, 15 minutes had passed. In this 15 minutes, Ji Tianxing attacked over 1,000 times, using countless divine powers and consummate skills. The Azura God Emperor only dodged, circled and fought, refusing to face Ji Tianxing head-on. Even when Ji Tianxing mocked and taunted him, he turned a deaf ear and suppressed his anger. After 15 minutes of fighting, Ji Tianxing's condition didn't change much. But the Azura God Emperor's injuries were even worse. There were over 100 wounds all over his body, all of them dyed purple with blood. His strength was also steadily declining and he was getting weaker and weaker. After a quarter of an hour had passed, he became suspicious and vigilant. He was a little anxious. What puzzled him was that he estimated that Ji Tianxing's transformation state would last 15 minutes at most, and his strength would begin to decline. But Ji Tianxing was still calm and composed, showing no signs of weakening, not to mention the backlash from the secret technique. What made him even more wary was that Ji Tianxing's strength didn't decline, but he only had 60% of his strength left. He didn't dare to delay any longer. Once his strength fell to 30%, it would be very difficult to escape Ji Tianxing's pursuit. And once his strength was exhausted, this incarnation would also be destroyed. Damn it, what kind of secret technique did he use to last so long? The Azura God Emperor stared at Ji Tianxing, wishing he could see through him. He was a knowledgeable person, but he had never seen a secret technique that could increase one's combat strength by 8 times and maintain it for so long. This was too heaven-defying. No, I can't be sure when his strength will decline. I can't just keep dodging and fighting, I have to counterattack to last longer. The Azura God Emperor changed his mind again. Seeing Ji Tianxing charging at him, he began to counterattack. The two of them began to fight fiercely in the void, their figures flashing and shuttling in the darkness. In the dark void, a deafening explosion erupted, and a dazzling divine light flashed. The area around the two of them was illuminated by the divine light, dazzling everything within tens of thousands of miles. Just like that, another 30 minutes passed. The Azura God Emperor's injuries were getting worse and worse. All 6 of his wings had been pierced and many holes had been torn open. There was almost no place on his body that was intact. There were at least 100 wounds so deep that bones were exposed and blood was constantly flowing out. With such serious injuries, his strength had fallen to about 50% and he was clearly feeling very weak. At this time, Ji Tianxing's dragon transformation state was still not over. Even though he had used up a lot of energy and his fighting strength had decreased slightly, compared to the Azura God Emperor, he was still full of energy and calm. The Azura God Emperor couldn't understand it all. He was angry, shocked, and jealous. It was already a miracle that a secret skill that could increase one's fighting strength by 8 times could last for 15 minutes. However, Ji Tianxing had lasted for 45 minutes, and there was no sign of him fading. This was absolutely unprecedented. If it were any other expert who could master such a divine ability, they would be able to challenge and kill enemies above their level. This was too heaven-defying. The Azura God Emperor was very jealous. He couldn't help but think that if he could master this secret skill, not only would he be able to easily kill Long Tian, the other 4 God Emperor wouldn't be his match. At that time he would definitely find the right time to eliminate the 4 of them one by one, and monopolize the gray fog in the myriad worlds. No, I can't drag this out any longer. Once my strength falls below 50%, it will be very dangerous. The only thing I can do now is to retreat. Emperor God Xiu Luo had such a thought. He felt his face burning and he felt extremely ashamed. Before this, he had never thought that as the Supreme God Emperor, there would be a day when he was forced to run away from an enemy. This was too shameful, too humiliating. Chapter 4180. The Azura God Emperor had already made up his mind to escape. As for the Azura Divine Palace, the Imperial Tutor and the thousands of soldiers, he could no longer care about them. At worst, the Rebel Alliance would win, and the entire boundless heaven continent would be occupied by Ji Tianxing. And he would bear the humiliation of not being able to defeat Kenshin and running away, and become the laughingstock of the boundless heaven continent, and even the entire God realm. Shame was indeed very shameful. But this incarnation could be preserved and would not be destroyed on the spot by Ji Tianxing. Even if the boundless heaven continent was occupied by Ji Tianxing, it was only temporary. After he dealt with the gray fog mystery, his original body could kill his way back to the God realm at any time and take back the boundless heaven continent. But today he fought Ji Tianxing to the end and most likely he would collapse here. The fact that the boundless heaven continent was occupied and he became the laughingstock of the God realm would not change at all. In contrast, he would lose an incarnation and more than 100 years of hard work would go up in smoke. Even though the Azura God Emperor had already made up his mind. But he did not reveal any clues on the surface to avoid being detected and seen through by Ji Tianxing. After he exchanged 2 more moves with Ji Tianxing, he took advantage of the moment when he was forced back by Ji Tianxing's sword and decisively teleported 30,000 miles away, fleeing into the depths of the void. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the Azura God Emperor left the battle circle and appeared 30,000 miles away, flying away without looking back. His figure flickered repeatedly in the void, crossing 20,000 miles every time he flickered. His speed was extremely fast. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing was also stunned for a moment, and a trace of astonishment flashed in his eyes. Although he also guessed that the Azura God Emperor's strength was not enough, he would definitely not sit still and wait for death and would most likely escape. But he did not expect the Azura God Emperor to be so cautious and flee so decisively. He thought that the Azura God Emperor would flee when he was even weaker, when he only had 40% or 30% of his strength left. Who would have thought that the Azura God Emperor would flee when he only had 50% of his strength left? You gave up on the imperial tutor and his soldiers so easily and turned around to escape without any hesitation. Do you not care about your reputation at all? Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by the world and becoming the laughingstock of the god realm? Ji Tianxing chased after the Azura God Emperor with the burial of heaven sword and godly hammer in hand. The Azura God Emperor was 50,000 kilometers ahead of him. However, he was stronger and in a better state. His speed was also faster. The two of them were like two resplendent specks of light. One was blood red, the other dark gold. They chased and leaped about in the void. In just 10 breaths of time, the distance between the two of them had shrunk to about 10,000 miles. To the two of them, a distance of 10,000 miles was already very close. They could exchange blows and kill each other. Ji Tianxing decisively swung his godly hammer and sword of burial of heaven and launched a fierce attack on the Azura God Emperor. The Azura God Emperor did not want to fight him head-on. He did not want to be entangled with him and lose the opportunity to escape. Thus, he only cast spells to block Ji Tianxing's attacks and minimize the damage to himself. Most of his strength was still used to escape. Bam bam bam. After a series of dull thuds, the Azura God Emperor's body flashed with divine light and blood splattered everywhere. His divine power shield had been broken and his injuries had worsened. His strength was also gradually weakening. However, at the cost of his injuries, he successfully evaded Ji Tianxing's attacks and continued to flee into the depths of the void. As he fled, Ji Tianxing continued to taunt and provoke the Azura God Emperor. He hoped to provoke him and make him stop and fight to the end. However, the Azura God Emperor saw through his intentions. No matter how much he taunted, the Azura God Emperor turned a deaf ear and continued to flee. At the same time, the Azura God Emperor was secretly calculating the time, praying that Ji Tianxing's transformation would end as soon as possible. If Ji Tianxing returned to normal and suffered a backlash from the secret technique, his strength would decline, and he would be in an extremely weak state. The Azura God Emperor would stop running and turn around to kill Ji Tianxing. He had been waiting for this opportunity. However, the duration of Ji Tianxing's transformation had far exceeded his expectations. He could not tell when Ji Tianxing would return to normal. He also could not guarantee that when Ji Tianxing returned to normal he would be seriously injured and whether he would still have the strength to kill Ji Tianxing. As time passed, Ji Tianxing and the Azura God Emperor continued to fly through the void, getting further and further away from the god realm. After another quarter of an hour, the two had traveled 3 million li in the void. At this point, Ji Tianxing's celestial dragon tyrant body finally ended. His body shrunk back to its normal size and his super strong combat strength also returned to normal. The Azura God Emperor, who was flying in front, saw that Ji Tianxing had finally returned to normal and heaved a sigh of relief. The pressure on him was greatly reduced. Phew. That damned guy, he actually maintained it for an hour before it ended. Such a powerful secret technique is rare in the world, one of a kind. Once I kill him, I will refine his soul and memories and take this secret technique for myself. With this in mind, the Azura God Emperor continued to maintain his speed while observing Ji Tianxing's reaction. He was looking forward to seeing how pitiful Ji Tianxing would be when the secret technique backfired on him and his strength rapidly weakened, or even when he was heavily injured. At that time he would have the chance to take revenge and kill Ji Tianxing as he wished. However, Emperor God Xiao Luo thought again and felt that something was amiss. Long Tian should be very clear that this kind of secret technique that increases one's combat strength for a short period of time will definitely have serious repercussions. Now that the secret technique has ended, if he does not want to be killed by me when the secret technique backfires, he should have given up on chasing me and turned to run. But he does not seem to have any intention of running away, he is still chasing after me. Thinking of this, the Azura God Emperor felt a sense of unease and fear. Could it be that after using this secret technique he will not suffer a backlash? That's impossible. All secret techniques that can temporarily increase one's combat strength will overdraft one's strength and potential, resulting in serious consequences. This is in line with the principles of the heavenly Tao. The Azure God Emperor could not believe that Ji Tianqing was safe and sound. But on second thought, this guy was the heaven's chosen child who was blessed by the heavens. What heavenly Tao's rule, heaven's chosen child should not be affected by it, right? Thinking of this, the Azure God Emperor's face changed, and his eyes flashed with anxiety and anger. Damn it, this emperor couldn't have guessed correctly, right? He sped up and fled into the depths of the void while paying close attention to Ji Tianqing's situation. In the end, Ji Tianqing chased him for another 1,000,000 miles and injured him 3 times, but there was still no sign of the secret technique backfiring on him. This confirmed the Azure God Emperor's conjecture, and at the same time he felt a deep sense of anger, jealousy and despair. A secret technique that can increase one's combat strength by 8 times and last for an hour without any repercussions? How can such a heaven-defying secret technique exist in this world and be obtained by Long Tian? The heavens are so unfair. Chapter 4181. To say that the heavens were too unfair to a lucky person who had been blessed by the heavens was somewhat helpless. The Azure God Emperor was indeed at his wits' end against Ji Tianqing. Even after Ji Tianqing's transformation had ended and he had returned to his normal state, he was still full of energy and divine power, not at all weakened or fatigued. Compared to Emperor God Xiao Luo, who was severely injured, his power was still very strong. Helpless, the Azure God Emperor could only continue to flee. His hope of killing Ji Tianqing had been dashed, and he no longer dared to hope for anything more. He would be satisfied if he could escape safely. However, such a small wish was very difficult to realize. The two chased each other through the void for another hour. Ji Tianqing was in a constant state of pursuit, catching up to the Azure God Emperor every once in a while and using his ultimate skills to beat him into a corner, worsening his injuries. On the other hand, the Azure God Emperor was in a constant state of flight, constantly being attacked by Ji Tianqing's various divine abilities and secret arts. He was exhausted from parrying and dodging. If he had stopped and resisted with all his might, he would not have been so badly injured. But even if he had stopped to fight Ji Tianqing, he was still no match for Ji Tianqing, and there was no way he could have turned the tables. In the end, he would have run out of energy and died in the void. Therefore, he was also very helpless to fall into such a passive and embarrassing situation. He had no way to turn the situation around. As long as no miracle occurred and no other God Emperor's avatar came to the Azure God Emperor's aid, the result of this battle was actually already decided. Even if he gritted his teeth and endured for 4 hours running for 30 million li, it was useless. In the end, Emperor God Xiao Luo's embodiment was destroyed by Ji Tianqing in the void after it was severely injured and its power was exhausted. Then it dissipated. Unfortunately, this was only an avatar. After being killed by Ji Tianqing, it did not leave behind any precious treasures. There were only 2 top-grade king-grade fangs, a spatial ring and a tattered set of armor. Moreover, the 2 fangs had been cracked and chipped by Ji Tianqing in the previous battle. Fortunately, the fangs and armor were both top-grade king-grade divine artifacts. Even if they could not be used anymore, the materials were still very precious. After picking up the 3 spoils, Ji Tianqing threw the 2 fangs and the armor to the heaven-mending orb to devour. Only the spatial ring was left and he kept it. After the battle ended, the void regained its tranquility and became pitch black again. Ji Tianqing turned around and flew towards the divine world, flying towards the gap in the Azure Paradise. After flying at full speed for 3 hours, he returned to the gap in the Azure Paradise. At this time, the Azure Paradise had been completely destroyed. It was on the verge of collapse and disintegration. Even the power of the heavens would not be able to repair the huge cracks and holes in the void. Ji Tianqing passed through the huge crack in the void and returned to the shattered Azure Paradise. As far as the eye could see, the scene in the grotto heaven had undergone a drastic change compared to a few hours ago. The green mountains, the endless forests, and the mountains had all disappeared under the ravages of the void storm. Everything within a few 100,000 miles had been eroded and occupied by the void, turning it into an endless darkness. Ji Tianqing passed through the dark void and returned to the depths of the paradise, where the Azure Divine Palace was located. He saw that the battle had already ended. The magnificent and majestic Azure Divine Palace's defensive array had long been breached. Under the attacks of countless powerhouses, it had been reduced to ruins. The remnants of the broken bricks and broken walls, as well as the rising flames and black smoke, were still telling the story of the tragic battle. The shattered defensive array only had a few foundations buried in the ruins. The dark red walls of light still flickered with a faint blood-red light. Fragments of weapons and armors could be seen everywhere in the ruins, as well as some corpses of divine monarchs. The thousands of soldiers under the Imperial Tutor's command had disappeared. The 10,000 soldiers of the Rebel Alliance and the 20 divine warships had also disappeared. Ji Tianxing carefully observed again and discovered that this battlefield had also been simply cleaned up. At the very least, the spatial rings and other spoils of war of the Imperial Tutor's soldiers had been collected. The corpses of the dead soldiers of the Rebel Alliance had also been collected. It has been almost 10 hours since I left the Azura Paradise to pursue the Azura God Emperor. The battle here should have ended 4 hours ago. Yao Yao, Cuckoo, and the others must have led the soldiers out of the Azura Paradise to recuperate outside. Previously, Ji Tianxing had left the Azura Paradise alone to deal with the Azura God Emperor. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had stayed behind to help the Rebel Alliance's army. Even if Ji Tianxing was not present, Nangong Buhua, as the deputy alliance leader, would make the right choice in time and give the appropriate orders. In addition, if Nangong Buhua could not make up his mind, he would definitely ask for Yun Yao and Ji Ku's opinion. Ji Tianxing was not worried about this at all. Therefore he looked up at the collapsed Azura Paradise and the ruins that were quickly being swallowed by the void storm. Then he turned and flew out. He was certain that the Azura Paradise could not be saved. After today it would disappear and be removed from the boundless heaven continent. The Azura God Emperor's avatar had also been destroyed. The Azura God Emperor would not be able to do anything in the short term. In other words, the Rebel Alliance had won a complete victory. The boundless heaven continent was under Ji Tianxing's rule. This situation would not change for the next few decades. The situation was just as Ji Tianxing had predicted. When he left the Azura Paradise, he saw 21 divine warships floating in the vast sea of clouds outside. Those divine warships maintained their formation, lined up neatly and waited quietly. The disciples of the various clans and sects had returned to their respective divine warships. They were probably recuperating and healing. Those 20 divine warships were covered in scars. They kept flickering with divine light and their power was somewhat unstable. Each clan had sent out a few God King experts to cast spells to deal with the scars and gaps on the divine warships. As for the God-slaying warship in the lead, it was naturally intact. There were only a few scars and scratches on it. Ji Tianxing returned to the God-slaying warship and spread out his divine sense. He was clear of everyone's movements. The white dragon was in the control room. He was busy studying various array formations and repairing some of the scars on the divine warship. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had returned to the distorted spacetime of the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda to heal their injuries. Ji Tianxing entered the distorted spacetime to check on everyone's situation. He was truly relieved when he saw that although everyone's injuries were not light, their lives were not in danger. Chapter 4182. The meeting room was extremely spacious. The 20 clan leaders and sect leaders only took 100 breaths to gather here. Everyone's gaze was focused on Ji Tianxing, who was sitting at the head of the table. They all looked excited and expectant as they waited for Ji Tianxing to announce the answer. This was because everyone was very concerned about one question. Did the alliance leader defeat the Shura God Emperor's clone? This was an extremely important question. Everyone could not wait to know the answer. Ji Tianxing originally wanted to ask everyone about the situation in the Shura Grotto Heaven. However, when he saw how excited and expectant everyone was, he guessed what they were thinking. Before he could speak, Nangong Buhua stood up and cupped his fists. He smiled and said, "Alliance leader, the battle with the Imperial Tutor ended 4 hours ago. During these 4 hours, while everyone was recuperating, they were also very concerned about your safety. Now that you have returned safely, everyone can be at ease. However, everyone still wants to know what happened to the Shura God Emperor's clone?" As soon as Nangong Buhua finished speaking, the clan leaders and sect leaders nodded and agreed. There were also 2 clan leaders who were good at flattering. They immediately took the opportunity to flatter Ji Tianxing. "Vice Alliance Leader Nangong, do you still need to ask? Since the Alliance Leader has returned safely, the Shura God Emperor's clone must have been defeated." "That's right. Do you know how wise and powerful the Alliance leader is? If the Shura God Emperor's original body is here, he can still fight with the Alliance leader. It's just a clone. He must have been beaten to a pulp by the Alliance leader. It's too horrible to look at. Although they were flattering, their words were not too exaggerated and did not make people feel disgusted. Instead, everyone smiled knowingly. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. After everyone quieted down, he said, "Before returning to the divine world, I killed several God Emperor's clones in the void outside the divine world. Although the incarnation of the Azura God Emperor had been sacrificed by 99,000 people, it had gained great power. However, evil can never triumph over good. In the end, he was no match for me. I've already killed him in the void and turned him into ashes." Hearing this result, everyone present was stunned for a moment. Soon after, they revealed an expression of disbelief and cheered in surprise. "You actually killed the incarnation of the Azura God Emperor? Oh my god. Isn't Lord Alliance Chief's strength a little too powerful? We thought that you would only be able to defeat him and allow him to escape in the end. Who would have thought that he would be so powerful?" The Azura God Emperor's avatar had 50% of his original strength, but he was still killed by the Alliance Master. Doesn't this mean that Lord Alliance Leader's true strength is not far from that of the Azura God Emperor? Haha. Although Lord Alliance Chief is a peak divine king, he has strength comparable to the God Emperor. Simply inconceivable. In the past 1,000 years, we have all heard of Lord Alliance Chief's various legends and miracles. Now we have followed Lord Alliance Chief and witnessed you create another miracle with our own eyes. We have won. The boundless heaven continent is ours. That's right. We have won. We have won a complete victory. We have won beautifully. Lord Alliance Chief is so mighty. The patriarchs and sect masters who were usually high and mighty no longer cared about being reserved. They all cheered and discussed excitedly. Their faces were full of smiles and their eyes shone brightly with excitement. After all, they had taken a great risk and followed the Rebel Alliance to fight all over the world. They had paid a great price. Now that they had finally won, their efforts were worth it. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and motioned for everyone to quiet down. He then asked, "Deputy Alliance Chief Nangong, please report the results of the battle at the Azura Grotto Heaven." Nangong Buhua hurriedly stood up and bowed. With a solemn expression, he reported, "Reporting to Lord Alliance Master, we didn't let you down. We successfully broke into the Azura Divine Palace and destroyed the army under the Imperial Preceptor. All the soldiers under the Imperial Tutor, regardless of whether they were God Monarchs or God Kings, were killed. No one was left alive. Even the Imperial Tutor was besieged by us. In the end, his body was smashed into pieces and he died on the spot. In this battle, the Alliance's soldiers had also paid a great price. A total of 4,000 soldiers were sacrificed. Of the 12,000 survivors, they were either lightly or heavily injured. There were also 20 divine warships that suffered varying degrees of damage. It will take a long time for them to recover. However, at such a price, we have destroyed the Azura Divine Palace and destroyed the Imperial Tutor's army. Can be considered a complete victory. Nangong Buhua paused for a moment. He, the patriarchs and the patriarchs all wore proud looks on their faces as well as gratified looks. Before this, the people of the boundless heaven continent only knew that the Kenshin was unparalleled and domineering. The Rebel Alliance had been invincible and had won successive battles because of the Kenshin's reputation and strength. However, in this battle, the patriarchs and sects had used facts to prove that they were not weak. They had enough strength to defeat their opponents. They had won with their own abilities. They had not let down the Kenshin's trust and high regard. Ji Tianxing revealed a satisfied smile and nodded. "Everyone, you have worked hard. Well done. Today's battle was won so smoothly because of everyone's efforts. I have already said that after saving the people of the world and occupying the boundless heaven continent, everyone will be rewarded according to their performance. I will begin this matter in a moment." Hearing the words "reward according to their performance," the patriarchs and sect masters' eyes lit up. They were even more eager and eager. At this time, Nangong Buhua continued to report. Reporting to Lord Alliance Leader, after the battle ended, the Alliance seized all the spoils of war and collected the remains and belongings of the soldiers. Seeing that the Azura Paradise was on the verge of collapse and was about to be swallowed by the void, We emptied the Azura Divine Palace's treasury and retreated from the Azura Paradise to wait for your return. We are still counting the spoils of war. Once we are done, I will personally present them to you. Ji Tianqing knew that the imperial tutor and his 10,000 soldiers were all very rich. They controlled a huge amount of resources and wealth. In particular, the Azura Divine Palace's treasury must contain inestimable resources and wealth. At the very least, there were resources worth tens of trillions of dollars. At the very least, even if there were resources worth tens of trillions of dollars, more than Ji Tianqing's entire net worth, he would not be surprised. After all, the Azura God Emperor had controlled the boundless heaven continent for more than 1,000 years and had been greedily seizing cultivation resources. Ji Tianqing nodded in agreement and said to everyone, "Everyone rest and recuperate for a few days. After everything is over, I will gather everyone for a meeting." Chapter 4183. Logically speaking, after the war ended, the people of the various clans and sects would naturally return to their grotto heavens to recuperate. However, the grotto heavens of these 20 clans and sects were distributed in various regions of the boundless heaven continent and were very far away from each other. Once they were separated, it would take another month to gather again. Since that was the case, they might as well wait outside the Azura grotto heaven for a few days. After the follow-up matters were settled, it would not be too late to return to their respective grotto heavens. In any case, the boundless heaven continent had already been conquered by the Rebel Alliance. The 20 clans and sects had already completed their mission, so they were not in a hurry to return to recuperate. They would rather wait a few more days for Ji Tianqing to reward them according to their merits, than return home in glory. In the next few days, everyone stayed in the divine worship to recuperate. Ji Tianqing also suffered serious injuries, so he entered the distorted space-time of the divine pagoda to recuperate in seclusion for a period of time. 4 days had passed in the outside world, and he had been recuperating in the distorted space-time for 200 days. His injuries were basically stable and there were no major problems. If he wanted to fully recover from his injuries, it would not be a matter of 1 or 2 years. He would have to recuperate for at least 10 years. After all, when the Azura God Emperor's incarnation fought with him, most of the injuries caused to him were Dao injuries. Compared to ordinary injuries, Dao injuries were even more difficult to recover from. Ji Tianqing ended his seclusion to recuperate and left the distorted space-time. He walked out of the divine worship to check on the situation of the Azura Grotto Heaven. The result was as he expected. The Azura Grotto Heaven had been completely devoured by the void and no longer existed. The divine formation and spatial door in the Sea of Clouds had also collapsed and disintegrated. That sky was originally the entrance to the Azura Grotto Heaven, but now it was already empty. From now on, the Azura Grotto Heaven was a thing of the past and would eventually be annihilated in the long river of history. After confirming that the Azura Grotto Heaven no longer existed, Ji Tianqing had to consider a problem. After occupying the boundless heaven continent, he had to set up a divine palace as the highest place of governance. Even if he was not in the boundless heaven continent, Nangong Buhua had to oversee the various affairs of the continent to show his authority. The divine palace could not be built anywhere. It had to be built in the grotto heavens. In addition, after building the divine palace, there had to be a large number of guards and god-king powerhouses stationed for a long time. This series of matters had to be considered at length. In addition, there were also the rewards of the 20 clans and sects that had to be carefully considered. Not only must there be no omissions, but there must also be a distinction between the severity of the matter. In addition to these few urgent matters, the subsequent control of the 90 domain masters and the entire boundless heaven continent also required strict regulations. Ji Tianqing thought for a while and decided to discuss it with Nangong Buhua. However, just as he was about to look for Nangong Buhua came to him. The two of them entered a study room inside the god-slaying battleship. After Ji Tianqing sat down, Nangong Buhua began to report the situation. He took out 10 interspatial rings and placed them on the desk in front of Ji Tianqing. His tone was a little excited as he said, "Alliance Master, fortunately we didn't let you down. These past few days, the 20 elders and deacons of our clan have been counting the spoils of war day and night. We've finally finished sorting them out. The spoils of war from the imperial tutor and his subordinates' interspatial rings are worth more than 300 trillion. They're all stored in these 4 interspatial rings. There are some extremely precious materials and divine weapons whose value is difficult to estimate, so we didn't include them. The other 6 spatial rings were filled with the resources and treasures that had been taken from the treasury. Although many of the resources and treasures in the treasury have been taken away in advance, it's less than we expected. However, after counting them, we can still estimate that their value is at least 700 trillion godstones. Nangong Buhua was the clan leader of an ancient clan and had seen a lot in his life. However, even with his status and experience, he had never seen such a huge amount of cultivation resources and wealth. Therefore, when he reported these numbers, his voice trembled a little. Of course, he was excited. Ji Tianxing looked at the 10 interspatial rings on the table. He wasn't excited or happy. Instead, he frowned. The resources and wealth in these 10 interspatial rings exceed 1 trillion, which is 1,000 trillion. It's reasonable to say that the Shura God Emperor has been plundering the entire continent's cultivation resources for the past 1,000 years. The treasury of the Divine Palace should have more than 700 trillion worth of resources. After thinking for a while, he suddenly thought of something and understood the reason. As far as he knew, when the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai were in charge of the Boundless Heaven continent, they would organize a batch of cultivation resources every 50 years and send them to the depths of the void outside the realm for the Shura God Emperor to use. The Shura God Emperor and the other 4 gods did this. They spent an endless amount of cultivation resources to study the mystery of the gray fog. The last time the powerhouses under the Shura God Emperor returned to the Boundless Heaven continent to transport cultivation resources was 40 years ago. In other words, the 700 trillion worth of cultivation resources stored in the treasury of the Shura Divine Palace were most likely collected in the past 40 years. Thinking of this, he was relieved. At the same time, Ji Tianxing was also shocked. The people of the entire Boundless Heaven continent were enslaved by the Shura God Emperor and forced to plunder cultivation resources. In just 40 years, they were able to plunder 700 trillion worth of resources and treasures? This amount was too shocking. From this, it could be seen how rich the Boundless Heaven continent was and how vast the cultivation resources were. Fortunately, the cultivation resources of the divine world were even more plentiful and almost endless. Only then could it withstand the greed of the 5 god emperors for the past 1,000 years. If it were the dragon realm, the cultivation resources would be far inferior to the divine world. They would probably be emptied out. At this time, Nangong Buhua lowered his voice and said, "Alliance Master, now that the war has just ended and the news has just spread, the entire Boundless Heaven continent is in a state of shock and celebration. With these cultivation resources worth 1,000 trillion, you can recruit soldiers and horses, recruit talents, and absorb millions of soldiers. With millions of soldiers, you can firmly control the entire Boundless Heaven continent and be able to rest easy." Everyone knew that the Boundless Heaven continent had 100 regions. It was simply too vast. It was difficult for Ji Tianxing and the people of the Rebel Alliance to manage the entire continent, let alone take care of everything. Only by recruiting talents like the Shura God Emperor and gathering millions of soldiers under his command, could he completely control the Boundless Heaven continent. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "This is feasible, but there's no rush. Wait until the situation stabilizes and then slowly implement it. After all, the leaders of the entire Boundless Heaven continent have all sworn to surrender and are completely loyal to me. There's nothing to worry about in the short term. Now the most important thing is to set up a divine palace as the highest ruling place and establish authority. I've thought about it, but I haven't thought of which grotto heaven to set it up in." Nangong Buhua frowned and thought for a moment before coming up with an idea. "Alliance Master, weren't there a few clans who were loyal to the Imperial Tutor and fought with the Imperial Tutor? Now that the main forces of those clans have been destroyed by us, their grotto mansions are only left with some old and weak people. We can take back their grotto mansions and you can choose a grotto heaven to build your divine palace." Chapter 4184. Nangong Buhua's words reminded Ji Tianxing. Previously he was wondering if he should build the divine palace in the Nangong clan's Yenshu heavenly abode. The construction of the divine palace could be left to Nangong Buhua and he would not have to worry about it. Moreover, he would leave the Boundless Heaven continent soon and leave everything to Nangong Buhua. This should be the most convenient and simple answer. However, after careful consideration he felt that this was not a good choice. Firstly, The Xianxia heavenly abode was in the south of the continent and was a little far from the north. Secondly, if the divine palace was built in the Xianxia heavenly abode, the Nangong clan could control the entire boundless heaven continent. Even though Ji Tianxing believed in Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang's character, problems would inevitably arise if the Nangong clan became the dominant clan. Thirdly, if he announced this result, the other clans and sects would definitely object. There would be disagreements within the rebel alliance and Nangong Buhua would become the target of public criticism. Combining these factors, Ji Tianxing gave up the idea of building the Xianxia heavenly abode as the divine palace. Nangong Buhua's suggestion was to choose a suitable heavenly abode from the clans that were loyal to the imperial tutor to build the divine palace. This was the most feasible option. This is a good suggestion. Ji Tianxing's eyes lit up and he smiled. The clan leaders and elders of those clans were killed in the war. However, they are loyal to the imperial tutor and the Shura god emperor. After the war, we will have to settle the score with them. Later, organize the information of those clans and give it to me so that I can choose a suitable heavenly abode. Nangong Buhua agreed readily. Ji Tianxing thought of something else and told him, later go find Cave Master Shimi and pass on my order. Tell his spies to keep a close eye on the targets. The war had ended for 4 days and the news had spread throughout the continent. Even though the imperial tutor is dead, there are still some clans that are loyal to the imperial tutor and the Shura god emperor hiding in the dark. When those clans heard the news of the imperial tutor's defeat, they would either hide deeper and wait for the return of the Shura god emperor to seek revenge. Otherwise, they would escape and leave the boundless heaven continent. No matter which choice they make, Xianxia heavenly abode must investigate. Nangong Buhua nodded again. Ji Tianxing continued, also, inform the patriarchs and sect masters to come to the meeting room in 2 hours. I want to reward them according to their contributions. We should settle this matter as soon as possible so that they can rest at ease and go back to recuperate. Nangong Buhua hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, Alliance Master, do you plan to gather everyone together and announce the results of the reward in person? Should I summon them one by one and reward them individually? That would be better, right? He was worried that the 20 clans would receive different rewards if they had different contributions. If everyone gathered and knew what rewards they had received, they would not feel good about it. It would not be good for the unity and cohesion of the rebel alliance. Ji Tianxing understood Buhua's worries and waved his hand to indicate that there was no need. It's okay. Rewards based on contributions are not shameful. There's no need to hide it. We need to gather everyone and announce the rewards to convince the masses. Since he had already made up his mind, Nangong Buhua could only follow his orders. Nangong Buhua bowed and left the god-slaying battleship. Ji Tianxing went to the meeting room alone and sat at the head of the table. He pondered and considered the follow-up issues. Nangong Buhua went to carry out his mission. He passed the order to Shimi Cave Lord and organized the information of the ancient clans. After that, he went to inform the various clan leaders and Buhua 000. 2 hours passed quickly. Nangong Buhua entered the meeting room of the god-slaying battleship and presented a jade slip to Ji Tianxing. Alliance leader, this is the information of the ancient clans including their casualties in this war. Ji Tianxing nodded and read the jade slip quickly. Although the contents of the jade slip were complicated and numerous, he finished reading it very quickly. All kinds of information formed three-dimensional images in his mind for analysis and comparison. After a few breaths, Ji Tianxing had an answer and made his choice. These clans are loyal to the imperial tutor and the Azura god emperor. After the situation stabilizes, we have to clean them up. However, we have to deal with the Imperial River clan first and take down the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven as soon as possible. Nangong Buhua's eyes lit up. Alliance leader, have you made up your mind to choose the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven as your palace and residence? Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement. Nangong Buhua thought for a while and analyzed, in terms of the history, territory and resources of the Grotto Heavens, the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven can be ranked in the top 3 in the Boundless Heaven continent. It is indeed an excellent place. In addition, the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven was located in the center of the Boundless Heaven continent. No matter which corner of the continent it was not too far away. Overall, it was indeed the best choice. Rest assured, Alliance Master, after today's meeting, this old man will carry out this mission. The matter of selecting a location for the Divine Palace was settled for the time being. At this time, more than a dozen patriarchs and sect masters entered the meeting room one after another to greet Ji Tianxing. Once the 20 patriarchs and sect masters were present, the meeting officially began. Ji Tianxing sat at the head of the table, glancing at the crowd calmly and said with a dignified tone, "After a few days of rest, I believe the condition of the soldiers has improved a lot. It just so happens that the follow-up matters are almost settled. Today I have gathered everyone here to discuss the merits and rewards. When all of you first joined the alliance, I told all of you about this. You have just joined the Rebel Alliance and we are still in the initial stage. No matter what benefits we promise you, they are all empty words. I'd rather give you your rewards after we've completed our task of subduing the rebels and we've won the battle. This is the real benefit and also the reward for your bloody battle." In fact, only the first batch of patriarchs and sects that joined the Rebel Alliance were promised the corresponding benefits and treatment by Ji Tianxing. These 10 forces could each control a region and develop their forces and businesses in the surrounding 10 regions. However, the second batch of patriarchs and sects that were loyal to the Kenshin and joined the Rebel Alliance were obviously treated a level worse. They could only get their own regions and could not develop their forces and businesses in the surrounding 10 regions. However, these 10 forces were fence-sitters and had waited for 3 months before joining the Rebel Alliance. It was not bad to receive such treatment. Although they felt a little regretful, they did not dare to complain. Now the Kenshin wanted to reward each force according to their performance, which comforted them. Chapter 4185. A whole year had passed since the establishment of the anti-rebel coalition and the uprising. Ji Tianxing was well aware of the various factions' performance in the past year. Even though he had been leading the Northern Army, he did not know much about the situation of the other 3 armies. But before that he had Nangong Buhua, Duguzhan and clan leader Wanyan report the battle situation of the past few months in detail. Ji Tianxing spent a few hours reading all the battle reports and statistics. He had an answer in his heart. He knew which of the 20 factions were serious, risking their lives to carry out their missions, and were sincerely working for him and the Rebel Alliance. He also knew which factions were fishing in troubled waters, were passive and slack, and even what mistakes they had made and what thoughts they harbored. This way he could be fair in his rewards and punishments. Of course, the 20 factions were all meritorious subjects and would not be punished. It was just that there was a big difference in the amount of rewards. Since the Xiong, Li, Wuxia and Ming clans joined the Rebel Alliance, their performance in the past few months has been very pertinent. They seriously carried out the orders of the Alliance and actively prepared for war. The disciples of the above 4 clans fought bravely against the enemy and suffered heavy casualties on the battlefield. 367, 315, 282, and 309 people died respectively. Apart from that, there are also many disciples who were seriously injured and are still recuperating. I am deeply gratified that the disciples of the 4 clans are so loyal and brave. Here I have prepared generous rewards for the 4 clans to reward the meritorious subjects and comfort the heroic kings who sacrificed themselves. After he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing took out 4 spatial rings and waved his hand, throwing them in front of the 4 patriarchs. These 4 rings each contained 15 trillion worth of cultivation resources, as well as 40 God King level divine abilities and secret skills. There were slight differences in the amount of wealth in the 4 rings. But overall the differences were not big and it was difficult to calculate clearly. Everyone in the meeting room did not expect Ji Tianxing to read out the names of these 4 clans first. At that moment the 16 clan leaders and sect leaders all looked at the 4 clan leaders in unison. Ji Tianxing's words were beautiful, praising the 4 families as loyal and brave, as if they had made great contributions. However, everyone was well aware that these 4 families were simply hooligans in the Rebel Alliance. Compared to the efforts of the other dozen or so forces, they were actually somewhat perfunctory. However, Ji Tianxing seemed to be kept in the dark and still gave them generous rewards. The 4 clan leaders did not expect that they would be so highly regarded by Kenshin that they would be the first to receive the rewards. After regaining their senses, they hurriedly stood up and bowed, thanking Ji Tianxing. Then the 4 patriarchs eagerly took the spatial rings and roughly checked the treasures inside. When they saw the mountain-high, inexhaustible resources and 40 immeasurably profound and marvelous skills, they trembled in excitement. Oh my God! This reward is simply too generous. Lord Alliance Leader, you're so generous. On behalf of the Ming clan, I thank Lord Alliance Leader for this generous reward. Lord Alliance Leader is so generous to our clan. The Zhuqiao clan will definitely repay you for the rest of our lives. Tens of trillions of cultivation resources were nothing to Ji Tianxing. However, to the 4 ancient clans, it was almost 30 to 40% of their entire clan's wealth. It was enough for them to use for 3,000 years. This reward was indeed generous and extravagant. The other dozen clan leaders and sect leaders did not know the exact value of the cultivation resources in the 4 spatial rings. However, when they saw the 4 clan leaders bowing and thanking them excitedly, they guessed that the rewards would be very generous. Therefore, the blood of the clan leaders and sect leaders sped up, and their hearts were filled with excitement and anticipation. At this moment, Ji Tianxing continued, the Dugu clan, the Wanyan clan, the Wanyan clan, and the Thousand Army Hall. After these 6 forces joined the rebel alliance, they strictly carried out orders. Moreover, their soldiers took the lead and fought with their lives on the line. I've seen everyone's performance and feel very gratified. Therefore, I hereby present generous gifts to show my appreciation. Especially clan leader Dugu Zhan and clan leader Wanyan. Not only are they loyal and brave, but they also understand my good intentions and help me solve my problems. They are worthy of learning and emulating. After he finished speaking, he took out 6 spatial rings and gave them to the 6 clan leaders, sect leaders and sect leaders. These 6 interspatial rings contained cultivation resources worth 30 trillion and 80 divine abilities and secret techniques. Moreover, the spatial rings that clan leader Dugu Zhan and clan leader Wanyan received contained an additional 5 trillion worth of cultivation resources and 10 secret techniques. The 6 clan leaders, sect leaders and sect leaders roughly checked the rewards in the spatial rings and were immediately dazzled by the endless amount of cultivation resources. The 6 of them were stunned for a moment before they exclaimed in unison, revealing surprised and excited expressions. All hail the Alliance Leader. Lord Alliance Leader is so generous with his reward. We are ashamed to accept it. The 6 clan leaders did not look at it for long. They quickly kept the spatial rings and bowed to Ji Tianxing, expressing their sincere gratitude. To be honest, such generous rewards were indeed beyond their expectations. Ji Tianxing gave them a few more words of encouragement before his gaze landed on the last 10 clan leaders and sect leaders. The 10 clans, led by Nangong Buhua, were the first to join the rebel alliance. Everyone understood what Ji Tianxing meant by putting them at the end. Obviously, Ji Tianxing had given out the rewards in order from the least to the most. The 4 clans that received the rewards first actually received the least. Nangong clan, Phoenix clan, Lan clan, Aries clan, 100 Smelting Ancient Sect, and Shimi Wonderland are the founding members of the Rebel Alliance. They are also my staunchest supporters. In the past year, the 10 clans have worked hard and put in a lot of effort. I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Now the Alliance's great cause has been achieved, and my initial promise has been fulfilled. However, the disciples of each clan have suffered great losses. Moreover, each clan has made an indelible contribution in this war. Therefore, I'm taking out 500 trillion worth of cultivation resources and 100 types of secret techniques to reward all of you. Ji Tianxing did not announce the exact value of the rewards for the first 2 batches of clans that received the rewards. Only the clan leaders who received the rewards could roughly estimate the value of the rewards themselves. However, it was different this time. Ji Tianxing directly announced the 2 numbers of 500 trillion and 100 types. Not only were the first 2 batches of clans that received the rewards dumbfounded, but they were also dumbfounded. Even the founding members of the 10 clans, the clan leaders and the sect leaders were stunned. Their faces were filled with disbelief. Nangong Buhua was even more shocked. He subconsciously exclaimed, "Alliance Leader, you can't do this. The rewards you gave them previously are worth more than 200 trillion. Now you're taking out 500 trillion worth of resources to reward us. Then all the spoils of war you obtained from the Azure Divine Palace have been distributed to everyone. You didn't leave anything behind." Chapter 4186. Nangong Buhua couldn't help but say what was in his heart. When the patriarchs and sect masters heard this, their hearts trembled, and they all revealed expressions of disbelief. Everyone stared at Ji Tianxing, their eyes filled with awe and respect. After the previous battle, the various forces worked together to clean up the battlefield, count the spoils, and move the Azura Divine Palace's treasury. In the end, all the spoils were handed over to Nangong Buhua for safekeeping. Everyone only knew that there were a lot of spoils from that battle, and the value of the resources and treasures moved out of the treasury was immeasurable. Only now did they know that the value of the spoils of that battle was an astonishing 700 trillion. What was even more unbelievable was that Ji Tianqing didn't keep any of it and actually distributed all the spoils to everyone. This was definitely something that no one present had ever thought of and absolutely impossible to do. If they were the leaders of the Rebel Alliance, they would definitely keep more than half of the 700 trillion worth of resources and treasures. Taking out only 1 or 200 trillion worth of resources as a reward for everyone was already extremely benevolent. The 500 to 600 trillion worth of resources that were intercepted would all belong to them, but in name they could be said to be the Rebel Alliance's assets. This was the most normal and reasonable thing to do. Therefore, Ji Tianqing's actions shocked everyone and made them admire him from the bottom of their hearts. Only now did they understand that Kenshin's vision, realm, breadth of mind, and bearing were not something that they could speculate or compare to. This was the true spirit of swallowing mountains and rivers and embracing the world. Only such a powerhouse was worthy of controlling the boundless heaven continent and being worshipped by hundreds of millions of people. Looking at the dumbfounded patriarchs with complicated expressions, Ji Tianqing smiled and said, 700 trillion worth of cultivation resources and treasures is indeed a shocking amount of wealth. To be honest, even for me this is a huge amount of wealth that I've never had before. However, the success of the Rebel Alliance's great cause is inseparable from everyone's bloody battles and contributions. Therefore, all of you are worthy of me rewarding you with 700 trillion worth of resources. I want you to understand that I and the Rebel Alliance are different from the Azura God Emperor. I will never be greedy for the resources of the boundless heaven continent and force and exploit the common people. There was another point, but Ji Tianqing didn't mention it. He was now the overlord of the boundless heaven continent, controlling and possessing the entire continent. No matter how many cultivation resources and treasures he wanted, it was something that could be easily obtained. While 700 trillion resources were astonishing, compared to the entire boundless heaven continent, what did it count for? Moreover, he did not distribute all the spoils of war to the 20 forces. He kept the Imperial Tutor's quintessence shard, his interspatial ring, the Azura God Emperor's interspatial ring, and the quintessence shards of more than 100 God Kings. The total value of these spoils of war was probably no more than 100 trillion. But to Ji Tianqing these were the most useful. After a while the patriarchs and sect masters calmed down. Nangong Buhua and the rest kept the space rings and bowed to Ji Tianqing solemnly to thank him. Ji Tianqing gave them a few more words of encouragement and then the rewards were over. Next, Ji Tianqing announced a few more things and assigned tasks to each force. First, he would take the Nangong clan to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven to deal with the Imperial River Tribe, take over the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven, and build a divine palace and mansion. The other forces such as the Lawn clan, the War God clan and the Phoenix clan, also shouldered different tasks to deal with different targets. They needed to go to the designated area to deal with the ancient clans loyal to the Imperial Tutor and the Azura God Emperor. Second, the War of Rebellion on the boundless heaven continent had just ended, and the chaos had yet to subside. There were still many forces loyal to the Azura God Emperor who were still secretly active. The intelligence forces led by the Shimi Grotto Heaven had to closely monitor the movements of the boundless heaven continent and find out those forces as soon as possible. In addition, there were all kinds of complicated matters. Ji Tianqing could not do it himself, so he left them to the other forces. After Ji Tianqing announced a series of tasks, all the clan leaders and sect masters said yes in unison, and then bowed and left the god-slaying battleship. Not long after, the people of the 20 forces drove the battleship and parted ways in the sky to carry out their tasks. Only the Nangong clan's battleship stayed behind to follow the god-slaying battleship. Under Ji Tianqing's instructions, Nangong Buhua put away the god-slaying battleship and stayed in the god-slaying battleship. Then White Dragon drove the god-slaying battleship straight to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven. Nangong Buhua stayed in the secret chamber to recuperate and heal his wounds, while Ji Tianqing returned to the distorted spacetime of the Jiutian Tenju Tower to count the spoils of war. The Azura God Emperor and the Imperial Tutor's spatial rings must contain unimaginable wealth and treasures. In addition, nearly 200 godly King Realm Godhead fragments were waiting for Ji Tianqing to refine. At the same time, Ji Tianqing led the more than 10,000 soldiers of the Rebel Alliance and successfully defeated the Imperial Tutor and his army. The news of their great victory spread across the boundless heaven continent. A few days ago, when the battle had just ended, Ji Tianqing had instructed the Shimi Grotto Heaven to deliberately release this news. Compared to the rumors circulating among the people, the news that the Shimi Grotto Heaven deliberately released seemed more official and detailed. When the people of the boundless heaven continent heard the news from the Shimi Grotto Heaven, they learned the details of the matter. It turned out that the Rebel Alliance had been in great danger after invading the Azura Grotto Heaven with unstoppable momentum. A few months ago, the Azura God Emperor's avatar had quietly returned to the Azura Grotto Heaven. However, the Azura God Emperor's avatar knew that he was no match for Kenshin, so he used an evil forbidden secret technique to sacrifice 99,000 gods to strengthen himself. When the final battle began, the Azura God Emperor's avatar had been strengthened to 50% of the original body's strength. He thought that victory was in his grasp and that he could easily kill Kenshin and turn the tables. However, the final battle's outcome was beyond everyone's expectations. Kenshin and the Azura God Emperor's avatar fought, destroying the Azura Grotto Heaven and fighting in the void outside for half a day. In the end, Kenshin easily killed the Azura God Emperor's avatar and returned safely. The Rebel Alliance's army also destroyed the Azura Divine Palace and killed all the soldiers, including the Imperial Tutor. 3 days later, the shattered Azura Grotto Heaven could no longer bear the burden and was completely swallowed by the void, no longer existing. Henceforth, the era of the Azura God Emperor's rule over the boundless heaven continent had come to an end. The entire boundless heaven continent, 100 regions, and all the people were under the Rebel Alliance and Kenshin's command. When the people heard this series of news, they were all inexplicably shocked and cheered excitedly. During this period of time, every place on the boundless heaven continent, whether it was a bustling city or a mountain village, was discussing this shocking event. After all, this meant that an era had ended. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 4187. The ordinary citizens were naturally excited and agitated. They shouted, "Long live the Sword God! Long live the Sword God!" After all, they were the greatest beneficiaries. Kenshin overthrew the Azura God Emperor's rule and rescued all the people who were oppressed and enslaved. From now on, the people regained their freedom and no longer had to be enslaved and oppressed. The divine race and the 100 races would also coexist as equals. The people who were rescued not only obtained freedom, but also had more opportunities to cultivate, become stronger, and accumulate wealth that belonged to them. And in the past, more than half of the boundless heaven continent's cultivation resources would be seized by the Azura God Emperor. Everyone understood that after Kenshin ruled the boundless heaven continent, the entire continent would usher in a leap in development and improvement. The people would be richer and more cultivation geniuses would emerge and more deity realm powerhouses would appear. While the people were cheering and applauding, excited and shocked, the dignitaries of all levels of the boundless heaven continent were nervous and very tormented in their hearts. For example, those city lords, kings and emperors were all on tenterhooks and filled with worry. All the regions of the boundless heaven continent surrendered, and those territorial lords all swore allegiance to Kenshin. For the various regions that were not loyal to Kenshin, the original territorial lords were also executed, and new territorial lords were elected. In other words, all the territorial lords were loyal to Kenshin and were under Kenshin's control. But below the territorial lords, there were still many empires, divine kingdoms and cities, and even many first-, second-, and third-rate family clans and sections. In the past, these dignitaries were under the rule of the Azura God Emperor, standing above the ordinary people. Now that the people obtained freedom, the status of these dignitaries became precarious. If they could be like those territorial lords swearing allegiance to Kenshin, it would be easy to deal with. But the problem was that their status was too low, and they did not even have the qualifications to swear an oath of surrender. Therefore, they had always been worried that once Kenshin issued an order, the territorial lords of the various regions would start moving and eliminate them, these dignitaries, or replace them all. At that time, where should they go? Should they passively accept their fate and wait for death, or should they raise their arms and fight back like the Kenshin Rebel Alliance? The latter was completely impossible and unrealistic. They did not have the world-renowned prestige of the Kenshin, nor did they have the unparalleled strength and methods. When the time came, they would have no choice but to accept their fate and wait for death. Of course, there were also some forces that were very flexible and knew how to plan ahead and adapt in advance. They would not wait for that day to come. They would transfer their assets and manpower in advance and quietly escape. Those factions that remained neutral were still fine. Only a few of them had fled. Most of them were still hesitating and observing. After all, they would not easily give up the power, status, and wealth that they already had before they received concrete information about the Kenshin's stance. However, those who were loyal to the Shura God Emperor and the Imperial Tutor were worried and anxious. Most of them chose to quietly flee the boundless heaven continent with their manpower and assets after hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. In their minds, since the Kenshin controlled the boundless heaven continent, they would go to other continents. Although they would lose their power and status, they would be able to keep their lives and have a chance to rise again when they went to other continents. Moreover, when the Shura God Emperor returned to the boundless heaven continent in the future, he would definitely seek revenge on the Kenshin. At that time, the Shura God Emperor would kill the Kenshin and retake the boundless heaven continent. They could still come back and seek refuge. If they stayed, the Kenshin would regard them as the remaining forces of the Shura God Emperor and eliminate them with iron and blood. However, the reactions of these nobles and forces had long been within Ji Tianqing's expectations. Shimi Grotto Heaven had integrated all the major intelligence forces and had been investigating and monitoring these forces. Almost every few days, Shimi Grotto Heaven would compile a list with detailed information and send it to Ji Tianqing. Although Ji Tianqing was far away in the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven, he could send messages and command the various forces and domain lords to intercept and eliminate those forces left behind by the Shura God Emperor. As for those neutral forces, even if they fled the boundless heaven continent with their families, Ji Tianqing did not pay any attention to them. A short 10 days later, another piece of news came out. Kenshin had personally led the Nangong clan to the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven. The Imperial River tribe of the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven had pledged allegiance to the Shura God Emperor 1,000 years ago. They were the first ancient clans to pledge their loyalty to the Shura God Emperor. Because of this incident, the Imperial River tribe had a very bad reputation among the common people, and many ancient clans despised and spurned them. However, the Imperial River tribe was very sensible and led the other ancient clans, which was in line with the Shura God Emperor's wishes. Thus, the Imperial River tribe had won the Imperial Tutor's trust and high regard over the past 1,000 years, and had received many benefits. As a result, the Imperial River tribe developed faster than the other ancient clans, and their forces were also stronger. The infamy and humiliation that the Imperial River tribe had borne for the past 1,000 years had long faded away with time. However, the benefits that they had received were real and tangible, which made many forces envious and jealous. As early as a few months ago, when the Rebel Alliance was in the limelight and invincible, many forces secretly speculated that the Imperial River tribe might be in trouble. Now, when the news that Kenshin had personally gone to the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven spread, many people immediately clapped their hands and cheered. Everyone knew that Kenshin was going to settle the score with the Imperial River tribe. As expected, Kenshin drove the god-slaying battleship and led hundreds of disciples of the Nangong clan to the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven openly. The Imperial River tribe's clan leader, deputy clan leader, several elders, more than 30 deacons and more than 1,000 elite disciples had all died in the previous battle. The Imperial River tribe had lost more than 80% of its elite forces. Those who stayed in the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven were not old, weak, sick or disabled, but they did not have much combat power anyway. Since the Imperial Tutor's defeat and the death of the Imperial River tribe's clan leader and others, the entire Imperial River tribe had suffered a terrible blow, and everyone had lost their backbone. During this period, the thousands of disciples who stayed in the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven were anxious and worried all day long. The thousands of people were divided into several factions, each with their own opinions, and they argued endlessly every day. Some people wanted to stay and guard the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven, and could not give up the inheritance passed down by their ancestors. If Kenshin came to settle the score, they could either fight to the death or admit defeat and surrender. All in all, the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven was the territory that the Imperial River Tribe had lived in for more than 30,000 years, and they could not give it up. Another group of people wanted to give up the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven as soon as possible, and flee the boundless heaven continent with their clansmen and all their wealth. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as they could successfully go to other continents, they could continue the bloodline of the Imperial River Tribe and return to the peak one day. Chapter 4188. Among the thousands of disciples of the Imperial River Tribe, most of them insisted on these 2 ideas. Other than that, a small number of people had various ideas. But those ideas had obvious flaws and their reasons were not sufficient. Most people did not agree with them. As time went by, those ideas that were not accepted by the masses were gradually drowned out. And these days, more than 8,000 people of the Imperial River Tribe had been debating whether to give up the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and escape from the boundless heaven continent. Before the thousands of disciples could come to a conclusion, Kenshin arrived with the Nangong clan. The Imperial River Tribe had closed the entrance to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and activated the double defense array. But they still saw the god-slaying battleship at the array at the entrance. When the Imperial River Tribe heard the news, they were all worried and anxious like ants on a hot pan. Many Imperial River clan people panicked, running around in panic while murmuring, "We're doomed. We're doomed. We're dead. What should we do now? What should they do?" Some Imperial River Tribe members calmed down quickly after the panic. They hurried to inform their clansmen to pack their belongings and get ready to escape at any time. And those who insisted on giving up the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and escaping from the boundless heaven continent were the angriest. As they packed their belongings and prepared to escape, they madly complained about those who refused to escape. If those people were not so stubborn and caused the clansmen to argue for so many days without a conclusion, they would have already given up the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and escaped. However, everything they did was in vain. There was only one entrance to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven, and Kenshin had blocked it. Thousands of Imperial River Tribe members could not escape. They could only hope that Kenshin would show them mercy and let them go. As for the double defense array at the Grotto Heaven's entrance, no one would be stupid enough to pin their hopes on those 2 arrays to stop Kenshin. That would be the biggest joke in the world. As for the 8,000 clansmen joining forces to fight Kenshin to the end, that would be suicidal. For a moment, the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven was in chaos. Thousands of Imperial River Tribe members ran around, but no one could take charge of the situation. 2 older and respected deacons stepped forward and led more than 200 young disciples to the Grotto Heaven's entrance to check the situation. At the entrance of the Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing led Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others out of the god-slaying battleship. Ji Tianxing was not surprised to see that there was no one at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. Even the spatial door at the entrance was closed. Nangong Buhua frowned and said in a low voice, "Cave Lord Shimi sent a message saying that no one from the Imperial River Tribe had escaped until this morning. It seems that the Imperial River Tribe is planning to hide in their Grotto Heaven and not show their faces." Nangong Nihuang looked coldly at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven and snorted. Do they think they are safe just because they are hiding in the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven? Since the Alliance Master had decided to expropriate this heavenly abode for the Divine Palace and the mansion, the Imperial River Tribe had no choice but to hand it over. Not to mention that Patriarch Yu He, the Guardians and the Elders killed many disciples of my clan during the war. We must avenge them. Nangong Nihuang hated the Imperial River Tribe, so she came here with the intention of taking revenge. Without waiting for Ji Tianxing to give the order, she volunteered and saluted. "Alliance Master, please allow me to lead the disciples of the Nangong clan to break through the entrance of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven." Ji Tianxing looked at her and said calmly, "I believe you can do it, but most of the disciples of the Nangong clan are injured, and you have not recovered from your injuries. If I really let you break through the entrance, not only will it take a day, but it will also consume a lot of divine power. There is no need for that. Let me do it myself. It will be done in an hour at most." After that, he used the Divine Eye Mystic technique to carefully observe the spatial door and array at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. After a short while, he found some clues and knew what to do. The defensive array at the entrance of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven was a king-level superior divine array. Although the divine array was exquisite and complicated, with thousands of changes, it was not a king-level superior divine array. However, the grade of the divine array wasn't high, so it wasn't a problem for Ji Tianxing. He frowned and pondered for a few minutes before deducing a way to break through it. Then he personally cast a spell to break the array at the entrance. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others assisted him. Just as Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua and the others were casting spells to break the array, the 2 elderly deacons of the Imperial River tribe led more than 200 disciples to the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. They used the array to observe the situation outside the entrance. When they saw Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua and the others breaking the array, their faces turned grave, and their hearts were filled with anxiety and worry. Panic and fear spread among the crowd. Many of the young disciples seemed to have foreseen the arrival of death. In the face of Kenshin, a legendary expert, they could not even muster the will to resist. Seeing that the disciples' emotions were not normal, the 2 elderly deacons quickly comforted them and explained, "Everyone, don't panic. They have not broken through the defensive array yet. We still have time. Moreover, judging from Kenshin's appearance and aura, he does not look like he is here to kill all of us." That's right. If Kenshin wanted to settle accounts with the Imperial River tribe and kill all of our tribesmen, he would definitely have brought a large army and come here with a murderous aura. However, he only brought the Nangong tribe's experts and a few supreme gods with him. There is no army at all. This means that he is not here to kill us. He is most likely here to subdue us. Hearing the 2 elderly deacons' words, more than 200 young disciples calmed down significantly. Among these people, a portion of them were originally in favor of surrendering. If what the elderly deacons said was true and Kenshin was here to subdue them, then it was not a big deal. They could just surrender directly. However, they could not help but worry. What if Kenshin was not here to subdue them, but to kill all of them and eliminate all of them? They could not possibly entrust their lives to the mercy of their enemy, right? At the thought of this, many of them could not help but shiver and a chill ran down their spines. However, when they thought about it carefully, even if Kenshin was here to kill them, they did not seem to have any way to survive. If that was the case, then they could only resign themselves to fate. Time passed quietly. Before they knew it, 45 minutes had passed. At this time, Ji Tianxing had broken through the space door and defensive array at the entrance of the 9 Palace Grotto Heaven. As the dazzling divine light shone, the space door at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven opened. Zhoush. A wise and mighty figure in a white robe stepped through the space door and entered the 9 Palace Grotto Heaven. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others followed closely behind. Even the deity-slaying battleship shrunk to about 3 feet and entered the 9 Palace Grotto Heaven through the space door. At this moment, the 2 elderly deacons and more than 200 disciples of the Imperial River tribe all focused their attention on the white-robed young man. Everyone's nerves were tense as they gripped their divine weapons tightly. Chapter 4189. The air seemed to have frozen. There was dead silence at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others stood in the sky near the entrance. 100 miles away, 2 elderly deacons and more than 200 young disciples were holding their swords and sabers tightly, looking at the crowd with vigilance and fear. No one spoke and the 2 sides just looked at each other in silence. The disciples of the Imperial River tribe were all holding their weapons and pointing them at Ji Tianxing and the others, ready to fight at any time. But their pale faces, frightened eyes, and trembling hands all revealed the fear in their hearts. They were afraid that Kenshin would turn all of them into dregs and powder with a wave of his hand. But no matter how scared they were, they did not dare to take the lead and attack Kenshin. Just like that, the disciples of the Imperial River tribe did not dare to make a sound. They stood rooted to the ground and did not dare to act rashly. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing looked at the crowd, walked toward them and spoke. Although the main force of the Imperial River tribe died in the war, those who stayed in the Grotto Heaven are old, weak, sick and disabled. But no matter what, there are more than 200 of them, right? Where are the others? Ji Tianxing strode across the sky, walking towards the crowd at a moderate pace. Although he looked calm and his tone was calm without any murderous intent or anger, he was too famous. The aura of an expert that he naturally exuded made the disciples of the Imperial River tribe tremble with fear. Seeing him walking towards them, the 200+ people trembled and couldn't help but retreat. It was as if there was an invisible wall in the sky that was pushing them back. Seeing these people's reaction, Ji Tianqing did not say anything more. He led Nangong Buhua and the others deeper into the grotto heaven. Along the way, he kept looking around and sensing the aura of the divine power in the grotto heaven. In general, the grotto heaven was rich in resources and divine power. It was indeed a rare place for cultivation. The 2 old deacons and more than 200 disciples of the Imperial River tribe flew away in fright when they saw Ji Tianqing and the others. Some of the smarter disciples had already retreated to the depths of the heavenly abode to inform their clansmen. Some of the smart Alecs retreated to the sides, hoping that the Kenshin would ignore them. After Kenshin and the others left, they would find a way to escape from the 9-palace grotto heaven. Then they would have a great chance of survival. However, as soon as these disciples retreated to the sides, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang's divine senses locked onto them. Wisps of imperious, sharp divine sense filled with murderous intent locked onto them, causing them to be stunned in place. Their bodies stiffened like stone statues. They didn't dare to run anymore. They turned around with difficulty and saw Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others' cold faces and sharp eyes. Therefore they immediately understood what Nangong Buhua and the others meant. You want to take the opportunity to escape? No way. The disciples who thought themselves clever could only lower their heads and retreat into the depths of the heavenly abode obediently. Before Ji Tianqing and the others arrived at the palaces of the Imperial River tribe, a few disciples came back to inform them. The thousands of panicked Imperial River tribe members were so nervous that they almost suffocated when they learned that Kenshin had brought people into the 9-palace grotto heaven. However, the disciples who came back told them that Kenshin had only brought 7 divine kings in. Moreover, Kenshin looked very calm and indifferent. He didn't have any murderous intent, nor did he attack them. At present, Kenshin didn't seem to be here to eradicate them. He was most likely here to negotiate or to subdue them. After hearing this news, more than half of the Imperial River tribe members heaved a sigh of relief. They looked relieved. As long as Kenshin didn't kill them and was willing to spare their lives, they didn't mind surrendering. With this thought in mind, the crowd quickly calmed down. At this moment, a few deacons stood out and said to the clansmen, "Everyone calm down. From the current situation, Kenshin doesn't seem to have the intention to kill all of us. Don't panic. Previously we were divided into 2 factions, arguing over whether to escape or not. Now that things have developed to this point, we have no other choice. If we surrender and pledge our loyalty to Kenshin, we can still keep our lives. If there's anyone who isn't afraid of death and would rather sacrifice their lives to maintain their dignity and integrity, we won't stop them. No matter what, Kenshin didn't attack us directly. This means that there's still room for negotiation. I hope everyone can calm down. It's best if you can get into formation and wait here for Kenshin's arrival." That's right. We need to show our sincerity in surrendering and show the appropriate attitude. Only then will Kenshin forgive us. If everyone is still in a mess and doesn't follow the rules, I'm afraid that Kenshin will kill us all in a fit of rage. Thus, the deacons took the lead and calmed down the 8,000 clansmen. They led everyone to the plaza of the main peak. After a full 100 breaths, the 8,000 Imperial River tribe members gathered at the plaza and lined up neatly. Then everyone waited silently in the square with an uneasy feeling. They weren't just waiting for Kenshin. They were waiting for the judgment of fate. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing led Nangong Buhua and the others to the depths of the 9 imperial caves, where the Imperial River tribe lived. There was nothing new here. It was still surrounded by mountains. Splendid palaces and magnificent mansions were built on top of more than 50 lofty mountains. Before Ji Tianqing entered the 9 imperial caves, he had received the relevant information and knew that there were more than 8,000 people in the 9 imperial caves. He had thought that the 8,000 Imperial River tribe members would be in a mess and scattered in various mountains. It would be a noisy scene. Or they would be scared out of their wits. They would pack up their belongings and scatter, hiding in various corners of the 9 imperial caves. Or the 8,000 Imperial River tribe members would be motivated and set up an ambush with integrity to fight to the death with him. He had several predictions and guesses, But he didn't expect that the 8,000 Imperial River Tribe members would gather at the plaza of the main peak and line up neatly. Not only him, even Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang didn't expect this result. They flew over the mountains and came to the sky above the main peak. They looked down at the 8,000 Imperial River Tribe members in the plaza below. Seeing the situation in the plaza and the expressions of the Imperial River Tribe members, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang couldn't help but discuss. These Imperial River Tribe members are very sensible. They actually gathered together to wait for the arrival of the alliance leader. Humph, a group of people with no dignity and integrity. 1,000 years ago, the Imperial River Tribe was the first to submit to the Azura God Emperor. Now that the alliance leader controls the boundless heaven continent, they are repeating the scene of that time. That's right. It's the characteristic of the Imperial River Tribe to be flexible. As long as they can survive, they don't care about dignity and integrity. Chapter 4190. More than 8,000 members of the Imperial River clan gathered in the square and put on a posture of sincere surrender. Although it was very surprising, it made sense when one thought about it carefully. After all, it was not the first time the Imperial River clan had done such a thing. Even though they had been despised by the ancient clans for thousands of years, the Imperial River clan did not feel ashamed and still acted as before. Although the Imperial River clan's tactful surrender reduced some trouble for Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua, and the others. But this still did not dispel the contempt and disdain for the Imperial River clan. Especially Nangong Nihuang, while despising and disdaining the Imperial River clan, she also felt a little regretful. This was because she had wanted to kill the Imperial River clan and avenge her clansmen who had died in the battle. But more than 8,000 members of the Imperial River clan had bowed and surrendered. Given Kenshin's character, he would definitely not kill these people who surrendered. At most, he would imprison or exile them. Nangong Nihuang would not disobey Kenshin's orders for revenge. Therefore, she could only regretfully give up on the idea of revenge. At this moment, more than 8,000 members of the Imperial River clan in the square, under the leadership of several deacons, bowed in unison to Ji Tianxing. Greetings to Lord Kenshin. May Kenshin's martial arts prosper and live as long as the heavens. More than 8,000 people saluted and shouted in unison. The rolling sound reverberated between heaven and earth, and it was somewhat deafening. However, when Ji Tianxing heard what the crowd was shouting, he frowned slightly. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others did not hide their disdain and disdain. The Imperial River clan was a powerful clan that had been tyrannical for thousands of years. They were the real overlords. Now these people of the Imperial River clan actually called themselves commoners? This posture was so low that they wanted to bury their heads in the ground. As for wishing Kenshin's martial arts prosper and live as long as the heavens and so on, it was even more nauseating. Even the 20 forces of the Rebel Alliance who worshipped and respected Kenshin could not say such words. This showed how strong the Imperial River clan's desire to survive was. After more than 8,000 members of the Imperial River clan saluted, they respectfully lowered their heads and waited for Ji Tianxing to deal with them. They also ignored the disdainful looks of Nangong Buhua and the others, and did not feel ashamed at all. In their view, it was not shameful to bow their heads in order to survive. The deacons looked at each other and hesitated. They didn't dare to answer. Apart from them, there were 14 other deacons and elders in the Divine King realm who had secretly left the 9 imperial caves a few days ago. In addition, over 500 of our clan's disciples have also escaped in the past 10 days. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and did not say anything. However, he turned to look at Nangong Buhua and gave him a meaningful look. Nangong Buhua immediately understood that the look meant, "I'll leave those Imperial River clan members to you." Nangong Buhua hurriedly nodded to show that he understood. Nangong Nihuang saw the eye contact between the two of them and was shocked. She cast a grateful look at Ji Tianxing. She knew that Ji Tianxing was deliberately giving her a chance to take revenge, to fulfill her wishes and make up for her regrets. However, everyone was well aware of this matter. It could only be understood and not spoken of. If Ji Tianxing ordered the Nangong clan to hunt down the Imperial River clan members who had escaped, it would seem that the Kenshin was too narrow-minded and ruthless. It would be easy for people to criticize them. However, the Nangong clan would have sufficient reasons and excuses to do so. They would not be afraid of people criticizing them. At this moment, Ji Tianqing took out a jade slip and threw it in front of the deacons. Swoosh! The jade slip emitted a dazzling white light and formed a huge light screen in the air. Hundreds of golden words appeared on the light screen. There was no doubt that the words that appeared in front of everyone was the famous Kenshin's exclusive version of the Pledge of Surrender. In the past year, almost 100 territorial lords of the boundless heaven continent had publicly recited this pledge of heavenly Tao. Therefore, the terror of this pledge of surrender had already spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. Many experts and first-rate forces even knew part of the pledge of surrender's content. You should know my rules. If you want to live, recite it accordingly. Ji Tianqing looked down at the over 8,000 Imperial River clan members and said expressionlessly. Hearing this, the people of the Imperial River clan on the square were all dumbfounded. They all looked at each other in disbelief. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others were also stunned. They did not expect Ji Tianqing to do this. In the past, only the territorial lords and the leaders of the top forces were qualified to recite the Pledge of Surrender. They did not expect that over 8,000 Imperial River clan members, who were old and weak, could also enjoy such an honor. That's right. The people of the boundless heaven continent were proud to recite the Pledge of Surrender. Over 8,000 people reciting the Pledge of Surrender together. That scene was exciting. Thinking of this, Nangong Buhua and the others also looked at the Imperial River clan members with interest. The ordinary clansmen were still in a daze. A few older deacons who had been through storms immediately came to their senses. No matter what they thought in their hearts, they all showed grateful and flattered expressions on their faces. They knelt on the ground respectfully and kowtowed to Ji Tianqing in fear and trepidation. Thank you, Lord Kenshin, for sparing our lives. With a few deacons taking the lead, the remaining 8,000 Imperial River clan members all knelt and kowtowed to Kenshin. Although there were a few dozen people among the 8,000 Imperial River clan members who still had some backbone and dignity, they felt humiliated. They were unwilling to kowtow to Ji Tianqing because they felt humiliated. However, they would be too conspicuous if they stood still when over 8,000 clansmen kowtowed. If the sword god were to use him as an example and kill the chicken to warn the monkey, then he would die too unjustly. Therefore, they suppressed the humiliation and kowtowed with their clansmen. Anyway, they were not the only ones who felt humiliated. Everyone felt the same. After kowtowing, the 8,000 Imperial River clan members recited the Pledge of Surrender in unison. Their expressions and voices were very solemn. It was only then that Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others noticed that the Pledge of Surrender that the Imperial River clan recited was different from the one they had recited. The Pledge of Surrender was shorter. It was obvious that Kenshin had set it up for the Imperial River clan. Chapter 4191. The Imperial River tribesmen quickly finished reciting the 300-word heavenly oath. At this moment, everyone lit up with divine light, and a trace of Taoist rhyme appeared above their heads. Above the sky, the 5-colored divine lightning flashed and the sound of thunder could be heard. Obviously, the heavenly oath was in effect, and the content of the oath was witnessed and supervised by the heavens. The 8,000 tribesmen were all shocked by the supreme heavenly power, and they stood there solemnly, not daring to move. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others also understood that Ji Tianqing set up this heavenly oath to restrain the Imperial River tribe. Even if the Imperial River tribe members recited the oath, they would not be appointed and trained by Ji Tianqing. They would be dealt with as they should. As expected. After the heavenly vision ended, Ji Tianqing said to the 8,000 tribesmen, "Seeing that you know your mistakes and are sincere in surrendering, I can spare your lives. But you must be punished for your mistakes so as to warn the world to avoid repeating the same mistakes. I announce that all the Imperial River tribe members will be expelled from the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and exiled to the far north icefield. Within 3,000 years, you are not allowed to leave the far north icefield or you will be killed." The Imperial River tribe had expected that Kenshin would not let them go so easily. Even if they recited the oath, they would still be punished. But they did not expect that Kenshin would give them such a punishment. For a moment, the 8,000 tribesmen were petrified, and their expressions were extremely ugly. This punishment was not too serious for the Imperial River tribe, but it was definitely not light. Although they were not tortured or deprived of their wealth and strength, their freedom was restricted. Not only did they lose the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven, where their ancestors had lived for generations, but they were also exiled to the barren and cold far north icefield for 3,000 years. It was a nightmare for them to be exiled to the far north icefield from the picturesque and rich land of the central region to deal with all kinds of ferocious beasts and sea tribes. After all, the far north icefield was in the northernmost part of the boundless heaven continent, between the Tianbei region and the Sunset Sea region. Ferocious beasts ran rampant there, and it was filled with many evil people who were wanted by the boundless heaven continent. Often, savage members of the sea race would enter that area to burn, kill, and loot. Thinking of this, the people of the Imperial River race trembled with fear, as if they had lost their parents. However, Kenshin's orders could not be disobeyed. They had already sworn a heavenly oath. If they disobeyed orders or escaped on the way to the icy plains of the far north, Kenshin wouldn't even need to do anything. They would be punished by the heavens and turned into ashes by divine lightning. Therefore, more than 8,000 Imperial River tribe members were silent for a long time, and could only lower their heads silently, indicating that they had accepted their fate. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others smiled when they saw the fate of the Imperial River tribe. Everyone agreed with Ji Tianxing's punishment. Ji Tianxing was kind enough to give the Imperial River clan people 6 hours to pack up their belongings and pack up. Initially, the Imperial River tribe thought that the treasury would be plundered by the Kenshin. There weren't many resources and wealth in the treasury, and most of them had been taken away by the fleeing elders and deacons. However, the remaining cultivation resources were worth more than 60 trillion, enough for more than 8,000 people to live for 1,000 years. They didn't expect that Kenshin would not take a single thing and let them take away the resources and wealth in the treasury. The people of the Imperial River tribe were secretly grateful for this. They also admired the character of the sword god. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed. More than 8,000 Imperial River tribe members packed up their belongings and left the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven on 4 divine warships with sad expressions. The entire fleet was filled with sadness, helplessness, and decadence. They calmly and quietly flew north. After the Imperial River tribe left, Nangong Buhua summoned a few hundred Nangong tribesmen to occupy the palaces of the Imperial River tribe and clean up the palaces. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang accompanied Ji Tianxing as they strolled in the sky. They observed and sized up the palaces within 1,000 miles. Do you have any suggestions? Ji Tianxing stopped and turned to look at the Nangong father and daughter. Nangong Nihuang thought for a moment and took the lead to say, "Alliance Master, the palaces of the Imperial River tribe have not experienced the flames of war and are very well preserved. It also saves us a lot of time, manpower, and material resources in building the divine palaces. However, the Imperial River Divine Palace on the main peak can be demolished and a higher standard palace can be built according to your preferences and instructions. Other than that, I think we can keep the 58 divine palaces and 42 mansions." Nangong Buhua nodded in agreement and said, "If Alliance Master has enough time to ask us to build a bigger and more sacred divine palace, we will do our best. However, since Alliance Master wants to solve this matter as soon as possible, I think we can keep the existing palaces and mansions and only demolish the Imperial River Divine Palace to rebuild. Also, if Alliance Master has any requirements for the layout of the cave residence, we can make some changes." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, "Actually, I want to occupy the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and build the divine palaces and cave residence here. It is more symbolic than practical. After all, after the situation in the boundless heaven continent stabilizes, I will leave and go to other continents to continue saving the people. Since I won't be living here and I don't have that many soldiers and guards under me, why should I build more palaces? Therefore both of you are right. We only need to demolish the Imperial River Divine Palace and build a more sacred and majestic one. As for the other peaks, palaces, and mansions, I will tell you later where you need to modify and adjust." In fact, as early as when the Rebel Alliance was established, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew that Ji Tianxing would leave after the situation in the boundless heaven continent stabilized. After all, Ji Tianxing truly cared about the world and wanted to save the people of the 5 continents. In other words, he wanted to occupy the entire God realm and save all the people of the God realm. The The father and daughter were already mentally prepared and knew that Ji Tianqing would leave sooner or later. But now, after hearing Ji Tianqing mention this matter, they realized that the date of Ji Tianqing's departure was very close. The father and daughter suddenly felt a little reluctant in their hearts. Especially Nangong Nihuang, the way she looked at Ji Tianqing became much gentler and more complicated. But the father and daughter were not coy people. They understood what kind of person Kenshin was, so of course, they would not pretend to persuade him to stay. Both of them nodded to show that they understood, then took out jade slips and listened to Ji Tianqing's instructions. Ji Tianqing stood high in the sky and pointed at several peaks and palaces, suggesting that they should modify and adjust them. The father and daughter listened carefully and recorded it in jade slips. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing finished what he needed to say. Nangong Buhuo put away the jade slips, bowed to him and left to pass down the order and carry out the modification task. With his swift and decisive character, he estimated that he would be able to complete the modification of the divine palace within 10 days. Chapter 4192. For the next 10 days, Ji Tianqing stayed in the 9 imperial grotto heaven. Under the leadership of Nangong Buhuo and Nangong Nihuang, the disciples of the Nangong clan were busy remodeling and rebuilding the palace. Ji Tianqing stayed in the distorted spacetime of the 9 heavens Tenju Tower, busy counting the spoils of war and refining the godhead fragments of the god kings. Among the many spoils of war, the space rings of the Azura god emperor and the imperial tutor were the most important. Ji Tianqing spent an entire day tidying up the 2 space rings. All kinds of rare materials, top-notch materials, gems and treasures were piled up into mountains. Just the space rings of the imperial tutor and the Azura god emperor were filled with cultivation resources and wealth, which were comparable to the spoils of war seized by the rebel alliance. Ji Tianqing roughly estimated that the resources in the 2 space rings were worth between 700 trillion and 800 trillion. In terms of cultivation resources and treasures, of course, it couldn't compare to the spoils of war seized by the rebel alliance. If the spoils of war could be piled up into 300 mountains, this batch of resources and treasures could only be piled up into 50 mountains at most. However, although this batch of resources and treasures was small in quantity, their quality and value were much higher. Ji Tianqing put these resources and treasures into his space ring and arranged them according to their categories. After that, he picked out a dozen top-notch materials. There were a total of 16 materials, all of which were of top-notch quality and priceless. There were even a few materials that only existed in legends and hadn't appeared in the world for thousands of years. Only experts like the imperial tutor and the Azura god emperor had such rare materials. Ji Tianqing picked out these materials because he wanted to forge the Burial of Heaven sword and improve the quality and power of the Burial of Heaven sword. Many years ago he had this idea. He wanted to improve the quality of the Burial of Heaven sword to the limit of the king level. Unfortunately, too many materials were needed to forge the Burial of Heaven sword, and they were too rare and precious. If he were to travel the world and travel through the major star fields to find them, it would take him at least 100 years. Therefore, this matter had been put aside until now. He didn't expect to find hundreds of precious materials in the space rings of the imperial tutor and the Azura god emperor. He filtered through them and found these 16 sets of materials, which were just enough to upgrade the Burial of Heaven sword. After making up his mind and gathering materials, Ji Tianqing no longer hesitated and started forging. He summoned the 9 heavens cauldron, activated the formation array of the divine cauldron. When the great formation was operating normally and the temperature in the divine cauldron had reached a suitable standard, he took out the Heaven Burier sword and threw it into the divine cauldron to refine it. 3 days later, the refining materials of the cauldron of Heaven sword refinement were cauldron. Of days after, recasting and smelting the Heaven Burier sword was very taxing on one's mind. It required Ji Tianqing to continuously cast spells. The process was not only meticulous but it also took a long time. However, Ji Tianqing was already used to it. He focused on refining the Burial of Heaven sword day after day. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Nangong Buhuo led the disciples of the Nangong clan to complete the renovation of the palaces and residences. The layout of the 58 mountains, the 108 palaces, and the residences became even more majestic, forming a heaven and earth great formation of their own. After Ji Tianxing's guidance and the Nangong clan's renovation of the palaces, not only did they look more sacred and dignified, but they also became more practical. Especially on the main peak, the dazzling Tianxing Divine Palace, which was as dazzling as the sun, was even more majestic and imposing. Ji Tianxing named the newly built Divine Palace Tianxing Divine Palace. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others did not delve into the meaning behind this name. In their opinion, Kenshin's name was Tianxing, and this palace was named Tianxing Divine Palace. It was normal for it to be related to the word Tian. In addition, the name of the 9 defense grotto heaven was not changed. After these 10 days, the relevant news had long spread throughout the boundless heaven continent and was known by the common people of the world. Everyone knew that Kenshin was merciful and forgave the thousands of Imperial River Tribe members. He did not even touch the Imperial River Tribe's treasury and resources. However, in order to show his authority and punish them, Kenshin ordered the Imperial River Tribe members to swear an oath and exile them to the far north ice plains. They were not allowed to return to the boundless heaven continent for 3,000 years. The people of the boundless heaven continent felt that this punishment was more reasonable. He punished the Imperial River Tribe but did not exterminate them. He gave them a way out. From this, it could be seen that Kenshin was magnanimous and merciful. He was indeed a wise ruler. After Kenshin punished the Imperial River Tribe, the 9 defense grotto heaven naturally belonged to Kenshin. Kenshin built the Tianxing Divine Palace in the 9 defense grotto heaven and set it up as a cave abode. It was the center of power that controlled the boundless heaven continent. After this news spread, it also caused a huge commotion among the people, causing hundreds of millions of people to talk about it. If nothing unexpected happened, it was basically certain that the sword god controlling the boundless heaven continent had already become an established fact. Since Kenshin had confirmed that the 9 defense grotto heaven was a cave abode, the next step would be to recruit troops and build a guard army and a patrol envoy team. The former would guard the 9 defense grotto heaven and maintain its safety and authority. The latter would patrol the boundless heaven continent and supervise the 100 territories. However, everyone knew that Kenshin's forces were the various ancient clans and sections. Those were the top nobles and overlords. Naturally, they could not be stationed in the 9 defense grotto heaven to be Kenshin's guards, nor could they be patrol envoys. As a result, Kenshin could only recruit ambitious people from the people and bring them under his command. Many Divine Lord Realm experts and Divine King Realm powerhouses all saw the hope of a meteoric rise. As a result, those clever experts and experts on the boundless heaven continent took the initiative to seek refuge without waiting for Kenshin to issue an edict to the world. On the other hand, several ancient forces of the Rebel Alliance were still tracking down and intercepting the remaining forces of the Imperial Tutor and the Azura God Emperor. Nangong Nihuang had also led several elders, deacons and many divine kings in her clan to personally search for and intercept those elders and deacons of the Imperial River Tribe who had fled in advance. With Ji Tianxing's approval, the Shimi Grotto Heavens secretly merged with the intelligence forces under the Imperial Tutor and took over the intelligence network that covered the entire continent. In short, Ji Tianxing had the overall situation under control. The chaotic and uneasy boundless heaven continent gradually regained its calm. Of course, the calm was only on the surface. There were still some undercurrents behind the scenes. However, under such a big situation, those small and scattered undercurrents could not raise any waves. As time passed, the remaining forces of the Imperial Tutor and the Azura God Emperor were destined to be wiped out. Kenshin's ruling power and control of the boundless heaven continent would also be strengthened layer by layer. Chapter 4193. 10 days had passed in the outside world, and Ji Tianxing had already been in the distorted spacetime for more than a year. He first spent half a year casting spells to refine the Sword of Burial of Heaven, successfully forging it into a top-grade king-level divine sword. Moreover, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was already the best of the best. Its quality and power had reached the peak of the king level. If it went one step further, it would surpass the shackles and become an emperor-level divine weapon. Of course, that was if there was an emperor-level divine weapon. After forging the Sword of Burial of Heaven, in the remaining months, Ji Tianxing began to circulate his energy to refine the godhead fragments of the Imperial Tutor and the many God King level powerhouses. The imperial tutor's godhead fragments were naturally of the utmost importance. Not only was the imperial tutor a peak god king, but he had mastered more divine Dao laws. More importantly, the imperial tutor was the Azura god emperor's #1 confidant, and he definitely knew many secrets. As expected, Ji Tianqing spent a month's time to completely refine the imperial tutor's godhead fragments and plunder the imperial tutor's divine soul memories. Through the imperial tutor's divine soul memories, he indeed knew many of the Azura god emperor's secrets. For example, when the Azura god emperor left the god realm, how many elite forces did he take with him? How many god king level powerhouses were there, what realm they were at, how many upper divine lords were there, how many people were there, and how many cultivation resources the boundless heaven continent sent to the Azura god emperor every 50 years, and so on. In this way, Ji Tianqing had a very detailed understanding of the number of powerhouses and military strength under the Azura god emperor's command. Of course, he only used this number as a basis to make a judgment of the Azura god emperor's military strength. He was well aware that the Azura god emperor not only took away a lot of military strength from the boundless heaven continent, but also gathered many powerhouses and experts in outer space. Even though he had already destroyed the Azura god emperor's strengthened incarnation. However, he was well aware that he was still no match for the Shura god emperor. The Shura god emperor's power was still as strong as ever. In the future, when he entered the outer space and battled with the Azura god emperor, he would need to be more careful and cautious. In addition, Ji Tianqing also learned about the forces that secretly sided with the imperial tutor and the Azura god emperor. Although the Shimi Grotto Heaven had been investigating this matter, they had indeed found several factions. However, there were still a few fish that escaped the net and hid themselves well enough that Ji Tianqing got the answer from the memories of the imperial tutor's soul. Ji Tianqing already knew the details of those forces. He planned to sort out this information and hand it over to the various forces of the Rebel Alliance so that they could eliminate the fish that had escaped the net. Among the many secrets, Ji Tianqing obtained the most important and also the most confidential information. According to the imperial tutor's knowledge, the Azura god emperor and the other 4 god emperors were doing their best to research the mystery of the gray fog at all costs because the 5 god emperors could sense the rich power of the heavenly Tao from the mystery of the gray fog, as well as an extremely terrifying aura of power. They firmly believed that in this vast void, even if there were 9 galaxies and billions of stars, they were all ordinary matters. Only the mystery of the gray fog, which contained supreme mysteries and power, seemed to let them see the location of the heavenly Tao. The 5 god emperors all had a premonition that if they opened the mystery of the gray fog, they would be able to uncover the world's greatest secret and see the so-called heavenly Tao. In fact, if they could crack and control the mystery of the gray fog, they could even become immortal and control the heavenly Tao. Compared to immortality and control of the heavenly Tao, the continents of the god realm and the various galaxies were not even worth mentioning. However, the mystery of the gray fog was simply too mysterious and powerful. Even after spending 1,000 years of effort, the 5 god emperors still could not pry into its secrets. They had brought many god kings and god lords with them to research and explore the mystery of the gray fog day and night, so it was only natural that they consumed vast amounts of cultivation resources. This was why the 5 god emperors were so greedy and unrestrained in their plundering of cultivation resources. Before this, Ji Tianqing had wondered many times why the 5 god emperors were researching the mystery of the gray fog at all costs. Just what was that mysterious sphere shrouded in the gray fog? If it could attract the attention of the 5 god emperors and make them neglect food and sleep to research it, it had to be the world's greatest treasure. It might even be related to the heavenly Tao, some mysterious power that had something to do with the god emperor realm. Now, the memories of the imperial tutor's divine soul proved that Ji Tianqing's guess was not completely correct, but it was in the right direction. Now that he had a rough idea of what was going on, he also had a corresponding conjecture and judgment regarding the 5 great god emperors' goals and plans. After refining the imperial tutor's godhead shard, he proceeded to refine the godhead shards of the other god kings. He had already learned many secrets from the imperial tutor. Thus, even if the other god kings knew some secrets, it would not be too important. Thus, Ji Tianqing did not waste any time in plundering the divine soul memories of those god kings. He refined another 20-some godhead shards one after another, and only when the time was up did he end his cultivation session. He had benefited greatly from this session of seclusion. Not only had the burial of heaven reached the peak of the king level, but he had also learned many secrets of the Azura God Emperor. In addition, his energy had been strengthened, and his fighting strength was now more than 30 times that of an ordinary peak god king. The number of divine Tao laws he had grasped had reached 1,450. After Ji Tianxing came out of seclusion, Nangong Buhua hurriedly came to see him and reported on various aspects of the situation. First, the cave residence's renovation had been completed, and he requested Ji Tianxing to inspect and correct it. Second, the situation on the boundless heaven continent had stabilized, and the various forces under the rebel alliance had completed their tasks. Third, in accordance with Ji Tianxing's orders, Shimi Cave Heaven had commanded the intelligence forces to inquire about the situation outside the boundless heaven continent as early as a month ago. Now, the results of Shimi Cave Heaven's investigation were out. Just as Ji Tianxing had expected, the news of the rebel alliance launching a crusade against the Azura God Emperor, as well as their successive victories and seizing cities and territories, had long spread across the boundless heaven continent. Now, related news had spread across the Reincarnation Island, the Qianquan continent and the Firmament continent. The people of those continents were very shocked by this news, and at the same time, they were also faintly looking forward to it. As for the fourth matter, Nangong Buhua asked Ji Tianxing if they should hold a ceremony to announce it to the world. Ji Tianxing had also considered this matter. Although there was no practical significance in holding a grand ceremony, however, the symbolic meaning was very important. After all, he had ended the reign of the Azura God Emperor and become the new overlord of the boundless heaven continent. If he did not gather the 20 forces under him and the masters of hundreds of regions to hold a grand and solemn ceremony, it would be too informal. One had to know that he was now truly respected, supported, and loved by hundreds of millions of people. In the eyes of the people of the boundless heaven continent, he was the embodiment of justice and the heavenly Tao. No matter what, this ceremony had to be held, and it could not be small. Chapter 4194. If the ceremony was not held, Ji Tianxing could stay for another month or so until the situation was completely stabilized, and then he could leave the boundless heaven continent. But if the ceremony was held, he would not be able to leave within 2 months. After all, the leaders of the 20 forces of the rebel alliance as well as hundreds of domain masters had to be present. The preparations for the ceremony would also take a long time. Ji Tianxing estimated that 2 months would be very fast. He agreed to hold the ceremony and named it the Boundless Heaven Universal Ceremony. It not only represented the change of ownership of the boundless heaven continent and his succession to the position of overlord, but also meant that hundreds of millions of people had regained their freedom and that the whole world would celebrate. The Boundless Heaven Universal Ceremony would still be hosted by the Nangong clan, and all the forces would cooperate. As for Ji Tianxing himself, he would still be a hands-off boss, and only needed to command and make decisions. Nangong Buhua did not feel that it was tiring or busy. Instead, he happily acknowledged the order and went to draft the preliminary regulations. He was well aware that as the vice leader of the anti-rebellious alliance, he had to do everything himself. After all, after the Boundless Heaven Universal Ceremony ended and the situation on the continent stabilized, Ji Tianxing would leave to rescue the other continents. At that time, all the affairs of the Boundless Heaven continent would be managed and handled by him. If he could not even handle such a small matter, he would find it troublesome and busy. Then how could Ji Tianxing rest assured that he would be in charge of the entire Boundless Heaven continent? He had to show enough ability to be qualified for the position of deputy chief, so that Ji Tianxing would be assured and the other 19 forces would be convinced. Nangong Buhua was very efficient. After just half a day, he brought the newly drafted regulations to Ji Tianxing for a look. The two discussed in the study for 2 hours, and Ji Tianxing made some changes and additions to the regulations he had drafted. Some of the matters that Nangong Buhua did not consider thoroughly were further improved by Ji Tianxing. In this way, the two finalized the specific rules of Haotian's ecumenical ceremony, and Nangong Buhua began to carry out his task. He first used the name of Ji Tianxing to send a message to the 19 forces under the rebel alliance and over 100 domain masters to inform them of the time of the ceremony. Then he mobilized more than 1,000 people of the Nangong clan and rushed to the 9 imperial grotto heaven to carry out the mission. He was going to lead 2,000 disciples to set up the venue of the ceremony in advance and do the preparatory work. The venue was near the entrance of the 9 Guards Cave heaven, but it was not between the mountains and the earth, but above the vast sea of clouds. When the time came, the huge venue would not only have to accommodate the disciples of the 20 forces, but also nearly 100 region masters and their entourage. It would also have to accommodate millions of commoners. The venue above the sea of clouds had a radius of at least 1,000 miles. It was completely formed by cloud platforms and supported by a great formation. If he wanted to make the venue appear sacred and dignified, he would have to spend a lot of time and effort to set up many complicated formations and decorate it with many materials. It would take at least a month for the 2,000 disciples of the Nangong clan to do all these complicated and trivial things. In addition, the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven also needed a large number of guards, both to guard the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven and to show the prestige of the Kenshin. The requirements for the guards were higher. They had to be at least an upper-level divine lord. The captain of the guards and the governor had to be at least a divine king. Most importantly, they had to recruit at least 5,000 guards to not look shabby. Even the 20 forces under the command of the Anti-Rebels Alliance would not be able to gather so many elite guards in such a short time. This was a difficult task. Fortunately, Nangong Buhua requested Ji Tianxing to announce to the world that they could openly recruit guards and form an army. Ji Tianxing of course nodded in agreement. He did not have to do the selection and assessment of the guards. He would leave it to Nangong Buhua. Nangong Buhua felt a little pressured, but he still accepted the task and promised to complete it on time. He had thought that it would be difficult to complete this task. But he did not expect that 2 days after Kenshin's decree, many divine lords and divine kings would come to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven to participate in the assessment. After asking around, Nangong Buhua found out that the divine lords and divine kings from all over the world had already arrived near the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven. They had already thought of this half a month ago, so they had made preparations in advance. Nangong Buhua was relieved. He felt gratified and secretly relieved. The so-called assessment was very simple. There was no need to compete in an arena. It was mainly to test the divine lords and divine kings' strength, divine powers and dharma spells to find out their background and conduct. Those who met the requirements would be selected based on merit, and those who did not would be eliminated. The divine lords and divine kings who were selected would have to swear a heavenly Tao oath that Ji Tianxing had specially made to pass the assessment. The heavenly Tao oath was very strict and solemn, but it was not excessive. The purpose of the oath was, of course, to ensure the loyalty of the guards and to restrain their conduct. The heavenly Tao oath that Ji Tianxing had made was widely known in the boundless heaven continent, and everyone knew about it. Therefore, the divine lords and divine kings who came to participate in the assessment were already mentally prepared. If they wanted to be loyal to Kenshin and become guards of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven, they had to swear loyalty. This was understandable. Therefore, the assessment went very smoothly. In just 10 days, more than 1,000 immortal emperors and more than 30 immortal kings passed Nangong Buhua's test and became guards of the 9 Defense Grotto Heaven. This greatly reduced the pressure on Nangong Buhua, and he was confident that he could complete the task ahead of time. The 1,000 guards who passed the assessment thought that it would be very difficult, but they did not expect to achieve their wish so smoothly. They were also very glad that they were quick-witted. In the following days, many masters and experts from all over the world came to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven to sign up for the assessment. After 1.5 months, more than 6,000 people passed the assessment and became guards of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven. Among them, 6 high-level divine kings were commanders, 60 middle-level and low-level divine kings were guard captains, and the ordinary guards were all high-level divine lords. Therefore, the guard corps of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven was officially established. Zhang Wuxia of the War God clan and Lan Ji of the Lan clan were respectively the Grand Governor and Vice Governor of the Guard Corps. Zhang Wuxia was the younger brother of the Aries clan leader, and also the 4th elder of the Aries clan. In the past year of war, his performance was very outstanding, and Ji Tianxing appreciated his efficiency and ability in carrying out the task. Lan Ji and Zhang Wuxia had similar backgrounds, and they were both elders of the Lan clan. They were both brave and loyal and their ability was outstanding. Ji Tianxing appointed them to lead the Guard Corps because he trusted the Aries clan and the Lan clan. When the Guard Corps was established, the clan leaders, and elders of the 19 forces also arrived. Nearly 100 territorial masters also arrived at the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven one after another. With more manpower, the layout and preparation of the venue were quickly completed. 8 days before the ceremony began, everything was ready. Chapter 4195. The preparations for Haotian's universal ceremony were completed. The 6,000 guards of the newly built Guard Corps were also training day and night to achieve a higher level of cooperation and tacit understanding in the shortest time possible. There were also various trivial matters that were being further handled and resolved. Tianxing did not need to worry about any of this. Nangong Buhua, the deputy alliance leader, would command the various forces and territorial masters to work together to resolve it. In addition, the news of the 9 Imperial Grotto Heavens universal ceremony had spread throughout the boundless heaven continent a month ago. Billions of people were excited when they heard the news. They cheered, celebrated, and discussed animatedly. Those who were closer to the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven all set off to attend the ceremony in person. Those who were too far away from the 9 Imperial Grotto Heaven could not attend the ceremony, so they went to various empires and cities to worship the statues of Kenshin. Many divine kingdoms were also planning and preparing to hold a grand celebration and worship ceremony on the day of Haotian's universal ceremony to express their respect and wishes for Kenshin. Haotian's universal grand ceremony had become the grandest ceremony in the Haotian continent in the past 1,200 years, causing all the people to rejoice. The 2-month deadline was up. Tianxing ended his closed-door training the day before Haotian's universal ceremony. 2 months had passed in the outside world, but he had cultivated in the distorted spacetime for 8 years. In these 8 years he had refined all the 200 pieces of divine persona fragments that he had accumulated. After refining those divine persona fragments, he consumed a huge amount of resources to perfect and cultivate the 6th level of the Heaven Punishment Divine Technique. He had deduced the 6th level of the technique to the extreme and reached a perfect level. Even so, the 6th level of the divine technique could only allow him to reach the limit of the divine king realm, but could not surpass it. He could only follow his previous train of thought and improve his strength from all aspects. He improved little by little and explored his own limits. On the other hand, the Heaven Patching Pearl and the 5 Elements world had been devouring the star fragments and crystals, as well as many cultivation resources. Tianxing had not finished devouring the star crystals that he had obtained in the extraterritorial starry sky. However, the Heaven Patching Pearl's power had recovered, and the 5 Elements world had been growing stronger, increasing his strength. When he ended his closed seclusion cultivation, his strength already reached 40 times that of ordinary peak divine kings. The number of divine Dao laws he'd grasped had also reached as many as 1,500. In other words, he'd already grasped half of the 3,000 grand Daos that had circulated in the world since the heavens and the earth were split apart. How inconceivable was this? Tianxing couldn't help but guess that probably only the 5 great god emperors were capable of grasping so many divine Dao laws, right? Ordinary peak divine kings did not even dare to think about it. The next day, Haotian's universal ceremony was held as scheduled. Outside the 9 defense caves under the blue sky in the white sea of clouds, the cloud platform, which had a radius of 1,000 miles, was beautifully decorated. It was like a fairyland in the heavens, like a dream. On the cloud platform, there were all kinds of decorations and exquisite buildings, pleasing the people who came to watch the ceremony. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that all kinds of exquisite sculptures, buildings and decorations made of white clouds were the work of master craftsmen. Not only was it perfect for viewing, but it was also very practical. The entire cloud platform looked illusory and ethereal, but it actually formed a powerful divine array which had super strong defense and power. More than 100 people and people from all over the world scattered around the cloud platform to watch the ceremony. They watched the ceremony with pious hearts, excitement and respect. It was their greatest honor and pride to be able to witness Kenshin's elegance with their own eyes. The guards of the 9 defense caves had already been distributed around the cloud platform, wearing armor and holding swords, looking solemn and dignified. But the people were emotional but orderly, and there were no disturbances. Nearly 1,000 first-rate forces from all over the world, and more than 1,000 emperors of the divine kingdoms also came to watch the ceremony. They presented generous gifts to the 9 defense caves in order to express their respect and congratulations to Xianxia. 100 domain masters, escorted by the personal guards, also presented their gifts and congratulated Ji Tianxing. As for the 20 forces under the rebel alliance, they also presented gifts and congratulations to Ji Tianxing at this grand ceremony. Ji Tianxing sat on the magnificent and sacred throne, accepting the worship of thousands of people and the congratulations of more than 1,000 forces. Nangong Buhua, the deputy leader of the alliance and the governor of the guards, stood behind him. Nangong Nihuang and the elders of the various forces stood on both sides of the platform like guards, waiting for orders at any time. In this way, even if it was boring for Ji Tianxing to sit there, it would not be too tiring. Accepting and registering the gifts from the various forces would naturally be done by his subordinates. He only needed to sit on the throne. After the gifts were presented, more than half a day had passed. Next, Ji Tianxing followed the established rules and gave a speech of thanks and encouragement to the 20 forces, 100 territorial masters, more than 1,000 forces and emperors. In short, he only needed to go through the motions according to the rules. After he finished his speech, he left the cloud platform, surrounded by the crowd and worshipped by tens of thousands of people. Only the leaders of the 20 forces and 100 territorial masters were qualified to enter the 9 defense caves to see him in person. The remaining 1 million people stayed on the magnificent cloud platform and began to sing and dance in celebration of the grand banquet. After returning to the 9 defense caves and entering the study of the Tianxing Divine Palace, Ji Tianxing finally relaxed. Everyone else had a mission and only Nangong Nihuang accompanied him into the study. Looking at the twilight outside the window, he chuckled and said, "Although it's just a ceremony, sitting on the throne for a day and receiving gifts and worship from various forces is also a boring and tiring thing. Speaking of which, it's even more tiring than a big battle." Nangong Nihuang personally brewed tea for him, brought pastries and divine fruits and comforted him. "No matter what, this ceremony must be held. It's just that you'll have to work hard for a day. You can rest for an hour first, and when the 100 territorial masters have all arrived, you can go to the conference hall. After today, the overall situation of the boundless heaven continent will be settled. You can leave all kinds of complicated and trivial matters to my father and us to deal with." Ji Tianxing thanked her, picked up the teacup and slowly tasted it. He smiled and said, "I'm just sitting on the throne, nodding and saying a few words. It's not really tiring. The real tiring ones are you, your father and so many soldiers. For today's ceremony, everyone has been busy for more than a month. Go back and tell your father that today's ceremony can be held smoothly without any mistakes, and it's all thanks to everyone's efforts. All the soldiers who participated in this ceremony will be given appropriate rewards." Nangong Nihuang nodded and said yes. After hesitating for a moment, she summoned the courage to ask, "Alliance Master, after the ceremony will you be leaving?" Chapter 4196. It was obvious that Nangong Nihuang did not ask this question on the spur of the moment. This question had been hidden in her heart for a long time, and it was only today that she mustered up the courage to ask. The study was very quiet and only she and Ji Tianxing were in the room. Her expression, eyes, and tone all contained an indescribable and inexplicable meaning. Any normal man would be able to feel her meaning and thoughts. But Ji Tianxing's expression did not change and his eyes were still clear. He slowly drank his tea and nodded naturally. "Yes. The boundless heaven continent has been saved, but the people of the other 4 continents are still in deep trouble. And the news has already spread and the people of those continents are all eagerly waiting. The powerhouses and domain masters guarding those continents will definitely make corresponding preparations and reactions. The longer I delay, the more prepared they will be and things will be more troublesome in the future." Seeing Ji Tianxing's calm expression and serious tone analyzing the situation, Nangong Nihuang sighed silently in her heart. He was obviously worried and concerned about these things at all times. It was not that Ji Tianxing did not understand the situation, or that there was anything wrong with him. On the contrary, the more serious he was and the more he cared about the people of the world, the more Nangong Nihuang admired him. But this also proved that Ji Tianxing did not have any other thoughts about her. In Ji Tianxing's heart she could not be compared to the general trend of the world and the hundreds of millions of people. This made Nangong Nihuang a little disappointed, and she also felt a little bitter in her heart. But she would not give up easily, and she had already thought of a response. She mustered up her courage and said, "Alliance Master has the world in mind and is determined to save all the people of the heavenly realm and return freedom to the world." Nihuang really admires such breadth of mind and courage. The situation of the boundless heaven continent has been settled. With my father, the patriarchs of the various clans and many domain masters, there should not be any problems. But Alliance Master, if you go to the other continents alone and the other party is prepared, it will be very difficult for you to start an uprising. Nihuang is willing to follow Alliance Master to conquer the world. I can serve you by your side, and I am also willing to lead troops into battle, kill the enemy and share your worries. I hope Alliance Master can fulfill my wish." The meaning of these words was very clear. There was nothing left to do in the boundless heaven continent, so Nangong Nihuang wanted to follow Ji Tianxing. Regardless of whether it was to serve him or to lead troops into battle, as long as they could follow Ji Tianxing, it would be fine. To put it bluntly, she was willing to hand herself over to Ji Tianxing for him to arrange and dispatch as he pleased. As a dignified, elegant and somewhat reserved woman, it took a lot of courage for Nangong Nihuang to say such words. Before this, she had hesitated and struggled for more than a month before making up her mind. At this moment, after she finished speaking, she felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She was so nervous that she even forgot to breathe. She held her breath and stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for Ji Tianxing's reply. However, Ji Tianxing did not look at her expression and reaction. Instead, he got up and walked to the window. With his hands behind his back, he looked out the window with a complicated expression. With his back to Nangong Nihuang, he said in a calm and slightly low tone, "Miss Nangong, you and I have only known each other for a short time and we have only met a few times. Why do you trust me so much? So much so that you have to leave your family and friends and travel to other continents?" Hearing him say this, Nangong Nihuang was about to express her feelings. However, Ji Tianxing didn't wait for her to speak and continued, "I've said before that I'm not alone. You've also seen it in the previous battle. Not only did my family follow me, but some friends also followed me. As for the other 4 continents, I also have some old friends and subordinates. Naturally, I will not fight alone. Therefore, you should stay to assist your father and help him manage the boundless heaven continent. To be able to maintain the peace and stability of the boundless heaven continent is also to share my worries, understand?" The meaning he expressed was still considered tactful. In fact, he was reminding Nangong Nihuang that he already had a family, and his wife and children were by his side. He could not accept Nangong Nihuang's admiration and pursuit, and he hoped that Nangong Nihuang would back off. Nangong Nihuang naturally understood what he meant, and the scene of the decisive battle a few months ago appeared in her mind. At that time she had paid attention to Yunyao, Jiku, Jiwuhan and Jiwushuang. She knew that they were Ji Tianxing's wife and children. While she was amazed by Yunyao and Jiku's charm, she was also very envious. Of course, the two sides did not have much contact. She admired and envied Yunyao and Jiku, but it was not to the extent that she felt ashamed of her inferiority. After all, she was also a peerless beauty in the boundless heaven continent. After being tactfully rejected by Ji Tianxing, Nangong Nihuang was a little disappointed and dejected, but she did not show any resentment or dissatisfaction, nor did she dispel the idea of following Ji Tianxing. She revealed a gentle smile and said to Ji Tianxing, "Alliance Master, I know that we have known each other and worked together for too short a time, and we have not experienced trials and hardships yet. Therefore, I know what to do and will not let you be troubled by this. However, you want to conquer the divine realm and eradicate the forces of the 5 god emperors. This is a difficult task. Even if you have family and friends by your side, there is strength in numbers. We all want to contribute to you. In addition to me, Nangong Ao also insists on following you to conquer the world. As far as I know, Zhan Wudi of the War God clan, Lon Kai of the Lon clan, and Yuchi Po of the Yuchi clan have all publicly expressed that they want to follow you and leave the boundless heaven continent. If Nangong Nihuang's request to follow before was because of love, then, at this moment when she made this request, it was because she had put aside her love and only cared about passion and righteousness. This made Ji Tianxing feel a little surprised. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Nangong Ao has made great contributions, and there are also Zhan Wudi, Lon Kai and Yuchipa. They are all people with great power, and their performance in the previous decisive battle was very outstanding. Now that the situation in the boundless heaven continent has stabilized, they can stay and enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and have greater power and status. Why do they want to give up fame and fortune and follow me to conquer the divine realm and risk their lives? Do you know who the next enemy I will face after conquering the divine realm and saving the various continents is? At this point, Ji Tianxing turned around and looked straight at Nangong Nihuang. Nangong Nihuang did not retreat at all. She looked at him firmly and said in a sonorous tone, "The 5 God Emperors. Because everything you've done is for the sake of taking revenge on them." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked in a serious tone, "Since you know, then you should understand that with my current strength, I don't have much of a chance of winning against the 5 God Emperors. If we really fight to the death, I will very likely be reduced to ashes and fall again. If you follow me, you can only be buried with me. Are you not afraid of death?" Chapter 4197. This time, Ji Tianxing's words were very direct and not tactful. He wanted Nangong Nihuang to understand how dangerous it was to follow him to battle the God realm and deal with the 5 God Emperors. He knew in his heart that with his reputation and prestige in the God realm, as long as he raised his arm and called for help, there would definitely be a swarm of followers. However, those who could follow by his side could not be ordinary people. They had to be loyal and trustworthy. Therefore, he would not easily agree or accept anyone as his follower. As for Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lon Kai, Yuchipa and the others, he still hoped that they would retreat in the face of difficulties. However, Nangong Nihuang had already made up her mind and was determined to follow him. "Alliance Master, we all know what you said and we have already thought it through. However, we are not afraid of death. To be able to follow the famous Kenshin and fight the 5 most powerful God Emperors in the world, even if we die in the void, we will have no regrets. In this world, some people covet power, some people covet fame and fortune, and even more people are greedy for life and afraid of death. However, we do not want to live an ordinary and mediocre life. We only want to have a beautiful and brilliant experience so that our lives can bloom with dazzling brilliance. Even if our lives will be very short." When Nangong Nihuang said these words, her expression was solemn as she stared at Ji Tianxing, her eyes shining brightly. Ji Tianxing could see that these were all words from the bottom of her heart, and there was not the slightest bit of falsehood. To be honest, he was somewhat touched. At this moment, Nangong Nihuang saw that he was silent, so she turned and opened the door of the study. "Come in. Tell the Alliance Master personally." She said these words to the several God Kings outside the study. Ji Tianxing turned and saw several young God Kings of different appearances step into the study one after another. These young God Kings were the people that Nangong Nihuang had mentioned just now. Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lon Kai and Yuchipa. Obviously, when Nangong Nihuang and Ji Tianxing were discussing in the study, these 4 young God Kings were waiting outside the study for the results. The 5 of them had already discussed this and chose Nangong Nihuang to express their wishes. It had to be said that this method was indeed effective. "Greetings, Alliance Master." The 4 young God Kings stood in a row in the study room and bowed to Ji Tianxing. Then, without waiting for Ji Tianxing to say anything, they said in unison, "Lord Alliance Leader, please allow us to follow you to conquer the celestial realm and fulfill our dreams." Nangong Nihuang had already explained their reasons and thoughts, so there was no need to elaborate. Ji Tianxing was a little surprised that they called it their dream. Seeing their similarly bright eyes and the same determined attitude as Nangong Nihuang, Ji Tianxing was a little hesitant. Originally he wanted to reject them, but after thinking about it he decided to give them a chance. "I hope that all of you have seriously considered this matter and not made this decision on the spur of the moment. All of you must think carefully. Follow me and leave the boundless heaven continent to conquer the divine realm and challenge the 5 God Emperors. This means that all of you will give up glory, wealth and stability and risk your lives." As soon as Ji Tianxing finished speaking, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, and the other 3 quickly nodded and replied firmly, "Please rest assured, Alliance Master. We have thought it through carefully." Since these 4 guys were so determined and swore to follow him and would rather die than retreat, what else could Ji Tianxing say? After staring at them for a while, he could only nod in agreement. "I have said what needs to be said. Since all of you are so determined, I will fulfill your wishes. All of you may leave. Go and make preparations to say goodbye to your friends and relatives. In about 10 days I will send a message to inform you." Seeing that Ji Tianxing had finally agreed, the matter was settled. The 4 young god kings were full of joy and quickly bowed to thank him. Then Nangong Nihuang and the 4 young god kings left the study room together. After they walked out of the study room, Nangong Ao and the others looked at Nangong Nihuang with concern. They wanted to know if there was a result of her discussion with Kenshin. Nangong Ao knew the inside story and even cast an inquiring look at Nangong Nihuang, asking her if Kenshin had agreed. Nangong Nihuang pretended not to see everyone's expressions and eyes and said calmly, "Everyone, our dreams will be realized soon. Next we have 10 days to prepare and say goodbye to our friends and relatives. Everyone, don't waste time. After all, this should be the first time we leave the boundless heaven continent and go to other continents." After saying that, she waved goodbye to Nangong Ao and the others and quickly left. Even though she pretended as if nothing had happened, Nangong Ao and the others knew that she and Kenshin had talked alone for so long in the study room and must have expressed their feelings. Since she did not mention this matter and her eyes and back looked a little lonely, it was conceivable that the result would be disappointing. Thinking of this, the 4 young god kings could not help but shake their heads and sigh. While sympathizing with Nangong Nihuang, they were also puzzled. As the 4 walked into the distance, they discussed telepathically. "Do you think Miss Nangong has expressed her feelings to the Alliance Master?" More than half of the people in the boundless heaven continent know that Nangong Nihuang only has Kenshin in her eyes and has waited for more than 1,000 years. It's impossible that the Alliance Master doesn't know about this. Looking at Miss Nangong's reaction, the Alliance Master probably still rejected her. Sigh, an almost perfect goddess like her can actually be rejected. It's really inconceivable. Are you kidding? Don't you know who the Alliance Master is? The world-famous Kenshin, how can he be measured by common sense? But I still don't understand. Nangong Nihuang is so infatuated with the Alliance Master and is so perfect herself. Why can't the Alliance Master include her in his harem? That's right. For a supreme powerhouse like the Alliance Master, it's natural for him to have 3,000 beauties in his harem. Since Miss Nangong has already taken the initiative, the Alliance Master should have accepted her. After all, one more won't make a difference. The 4 young god kings expressed that they could not understand and walked away while discussing. Ji Tianxing sat alone in the study for a while. When the messenger guard came to report that the 100 domain masters had gathered in the meeting hall, he got up and left the study. Night had already fallen, and the meeting hall of the Divine Palace was brightly lit. When Ji Tianxing stepped into the hall, the 100 domain masters had already arrived and stood in 2 rows in the hall. Ji Tianxing walked to the throne at the head of the table, and all the domain masters bowed in greeting. After greeting each other, Ji Tianxing sat down and began the meeting. Tonight's meeting was mainly to instruct and arrange some tasks for the 100 domain masters, as well as give them some words of encouragement and praise. The purpose was to let the domain masters be loyal to their duties and work wholeheartedly. Chapter 4198. Although it was useless to only rely on words to govern the entire boundless heaven continent. No matter how high Ji Tianxing's prestige was, and no matter how reasonable and intimidating his words were, it was difficult to make all the territorial lords obey him. To truly control the boundless heaven continent, one still needed a clear system of rewards and punishments, clear and strict rules and laws, as well as powerful strength and abundant resources and so on. However, this was the first time the 100 territorial lords had gathered to meet Ji Tianxing face to face, so they still had to go through the process. Ji Tianxing carried out the meeting in an orderly manner according to the established procedures. The 100 domain lords had all sworn the oath of surrender, and they were all very respectful. They also agreed to Ji Tianxing's instructions and requests without hesitation, saying that they would definitely complete the task and would not disappoint Kenshin. Just like that, the meeting ended after 4 hours. It was late at night. Ji Tianxing left the meeting hall and returned to his residence to meditate and cultivate. The 100 territorial lords dispersed. Some stayed in the cave abode temporarily, while others went to meet the clan leaders and sect masters of the 20 forces. This grand ceremony also gave the territorial lords, clan leaders, and sect masters a chance to meet face to face. Even if those territorial lords wanted to curry favor with those clan leaders and sect masters, Ji Tianqing did not care. In his opinion, it would also be helpful to maintain the stability of the boundless heaven continent if the territorial lords, clan leaders, and sect masters became closer to each other. Anyway, these people had all sworn the oath of surrender, so no one dared to do anything out of line. Ji Tianqing was completely at ease. This grand ceremony lasted for 3 days and 3 nights before it ended. On the 4th day, more than 1 million people left one after another. Next, the 100 territorial lords also bade farewell to Ji Tianqing and left the 9 palace grotto heaven with their guards. On the 5th day, more than a dozen leaders of the ancient clans and sects also bade farewell to Ji Tianqing and left. On the 6th day, only the guard army and a few hundred disciples of the Nangong clan were left in the 9 palace grotto heaven. The grand ceremony was over and more than 1 million people had left. However, the venue had to be demolished and cleaned, so it was naturally done by these people. Nangong Buhua led more than 6,000 men and entered a tense and busy state. After 2 months of tempering and experimenting, he had already entered the state long ago and practically took over the affairs of the boundless heaven continent. Almost every day there would be memorials and letters sent to the 9 defense grotto heaven from various regions, forces and empires. Nangong Buhua would personally look through the numerous official affairs and make appropriate decisions. He would only ask for Ji Tianqing's advice when he couldn't make up his mind or when he had a difficult decision to make. Of course, now that the situation in the boundless heaven continent was stable, this kind of major event would also become fewer and fewer. On the 10th day, the venue and the subsequent cleanup work were all finished. The 9 royals' cave abode was peaceful again. At noon, Ji Tianqing steered the god-slaying battleship and took Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lon Kai, Yuchipa, and the others out of the 9 imperial grotto heaven. Today was the day of his departure. Nangong Buhua, the captains of the guard corps, and the governor sent him out of the 9 defenses cave heaven and into the vast sky. After the god-slaying battleship disappeared into the horizon, Nangong Buhua brought everyone back to the 9 defense grotto heaven and continued to handle the complicated official affairs. Although the leaders of the 20 ancient clans and sects all knew that Ji Tianqing was leaving today and heading to other continents. Previously, the various forces had also expressed that they were willing to send hundreds of elites to follow Ji Tianqing into battle. After all, they were all under the command of the Rebel Alliance. If each of them sent hundreds of people, they would have an army of 10,000 people in total. However, Ji Tianqing rejected everyone's suggestion and only brought Nangong Nihuang and the others with him instead of a large group of soldiers. Moreover, apart from Nangong Buhua, no one knew his goal and whereabouts at the moment. The god-slaying battleship had been flying in the sky for 2 hours. Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, and the others couldn't help but urge Nangong Nihuang to ask Ji Tianqing where they were heading to. Seeing the 4 young god kings' expectant and curious faces, Nangong Nihuang coldly reprimanded them. If the alliance leader wants us to know where we are going next, he will naturally tell us. Since the alliance leader didn't tell everyone, it means that the goal still needs to be kept a secret. You guys are so anxious to know the alliance leader's goal. Aren't you afraid of leaking the secret and ruining the alliance leader's plans? After being rebuked by her, the 4 young god kings were embarrassed and speechless. All right. You are still the most thoughtful. We were reckless. You're a girl. You are right. But, Miss Nangong, don't you want to know which continent the alliance leader is going to attack? Nangong Nihuang didn't hesitate and replied expressionlessly, I don't want to. No matter which continent the alliance leader is going to attack, he has his reasons. What we need to do is listen to his arrangements and execute his orders, not speculate about what the alliance leader is going to do. There's no way to continue this conversation. The 4 young god kings were embarrassed and speechless. Only Nangong Ao, who had long understood Nangong Nihuang's character, didn't feel depressed. Instead, he smiled. Seeing the other 3 guys being defeated, he was secretly pleased. After all, the 4 of them were the best of the younger generation. They were relatively young high-level god kings. Everyone had their own principles and pride. They also had the intention to compete with each other. No one was willing to submit to the other. Unexpectedly, the 4 men who were all high-level god kings couldn't even compare to a middle-level god king girl. They were speechless and had no temper. Zhang Wudi, Lan Kai, and Yuchipa all shook their heads and dispersed. They returned to their rooms to cultivate. Only Nangong Ao stayed in place. He winked at Nangong Nihuang and asked, "Miss, have you confessed to Kenshin?" Nangong Nihuang didn't say a word. She rolled her eyes at him coldly. Nangong Ao smiled and then asked, "Well, I know things may not go so smoothly, but don't be discouraged. As the old saying goes, there is a mountain between a man and a woman. There is a layer of gauze between a woman and a man. Even if Kenshin doesn't understand romance and is a blockhead, as long as you are hot enough, you can melt him sooner or later. Besides, Kenshin is not really a vegetarian. He has 2 wives. As long as you continue to work hard and let him see your sincerity and affection, I believe you will become the 3rd one sooner or later." Before Nangong Ao could finish speaking, Nangong Nihuang, who was a little embarrassed, waved her hand and slashed at him. Although it wasn't a real fight, the lethality of the saber light wasn't strong. However, this method was very effective. Nangong Ao immediately shut his mouth obediently. Nangong Nihuang couldn't be bothered to listen to his nonsense. She turned and left. Returning to her exclusive room, she entered the secret room to meditate. It took her a quarter of an hour to calm down her chaotic emotions before she could cultivate. Chapter 4199. Time always passed quickly during peaceful days. Half a month passed in a flash. The boundless heaven continent returned to peace, and even the undercurrent was gradually disappearing. The remaining forces of the Imperial Tutor and the Azura God Emperor were mostly wiped out, except for a few who escaped to other continents. The ancient clans, top forces, and sects that had once maintained a neutral and wait-and-see attitude obediently went into hiding, as if they were hiding from the world. Now that the boundless heaven continent was Kenshin's territory, they did not dare to have any ideas. It would be good enough if they were not punished by Kenshin. After all, the 20 forces and 100 territorial masters under Kenshin were unprecedentedly loyal to Kenshin. As long as Kenshin gave the order, he did not need to be famous at all. The forces under his command could sweep away all obstacles. Due to Kenshin's supreme prestige and the fact that 90% of the people supported and believed in him, the replacement of the system and laws of the boundless heaven continent was also proceeding exceptionally smoothly. Nangong Buhua was extremely busy every day, but he never complained about being tired. He said he enjoyed it, because Kenshin trusted him and completely handed over the boundless heaven continent to him. And he could use his own ability to govern the boundless heaven continent to become more perfect, peaceful, and beautiful. It was also a very fulfilling thing. This could not only prove his talent and ability to Kenshin, many ancient clans, and the people of the boundless heaven continent. Thousands of years later, tens of thousands of years later, he would still be able to leave his name in history. This was the lifelong pursuit and dream of many immortal king experts. At the same time, the god-slaying battleship crossed half of the boundless heaven continent and arrived at the southern border. If they flew another 10,000 miles forward, they would arrive at the vast Xiaolong territorial waters. At this time, Nangong Ao, Zhang Wudi, Lan Kai, and the others who had been cultivating in the room gathered together to discuss quietly. They were discussing the same topic. Which continent would Kenshin attack? We are at the south of the continent, and the Xiaolong territorial waters are in front of us. Now it seems that the leader's target can only be the Reincarnation Island or the boundless heaven continent. That's right. The Qianquan continent is to our east. If the leader wants to attack the Qianquan continent, he must pass through the Wuji territorial waters. The primal chaos continent is the furthest away from us. Not only are there 2 sea regions between us, there is also the Reincarnation Island between us. Therefore, the Qianquan continent and the primal chaos continent can be eliminated. Since I have to choose between the Reincarnation Island and the Firmament Land, I will choose the Firmament Land. That's because as long as we keep flying south, we'll be able to reach it in half a month. According to what you said, we can reach the Reincarnation Island in half a month if we head southeast. I think it's more likely that the Alliance Master will choose Reincarnation Island. After all, the territory of the Reincarnation Island is even smaller. With the number of people we have, it won't be too difficult to take over the Reincarnation Island. If we attack the Firmament continent, I feel that we have too few people. You're worrying for nothing, aren't you? With the prestige of our alliance master, as long as we raise our arms and call for action, who would dare to disobey? I'm afraid that as soon as we arrive at the firmament continent, as soon as the alliance master shows his name, there will be thousands of experts coming to join us. The 4 young god kings were gathered in a room, arguing endlessly around a jade table. When they were thirsty, they would even brew a cup of tea to drink. At this moment, Nangong Nihuang's voice suddenly came from outside the door. The 4 of you don't hide inside and whisper. The alliance master has ordered that he has an important task for us. Open the door. Nangong Nihuang's somewhat cold and mature voice made the 4 young god kings who were whispering immediately restrain their expressions. They immediately resumed their upright and still posture, as if they had done nothing at all. Nangong Ao took the initiative to open the door, and Nangong Nihuang walked in with a few jade slips. As usual, she was swift and decisive. She didn't talk nonsense with them and directly threw the 4 jade slips on the jade table. Each of you will have a jade slip. Inside it are the 3 super skills that the alliance master has imparted to us. They are used to hide one's aura, disguise one's appearance, and investigate. The alliance master has asked us to comprehend and master the 3 super skills within 20 days. Because in 20 days, we will use these super skills and secret skills to carry out an important task. The 4 young god kings were stunned for a moment. Then they revealed expressions of surprise and disbelief. They subconsciously picked up the jade slips and read the super skills recorded inside. Nangong Nihuang crossed her arms in front of her, hugging the huge sin. She looked down at everyone and said with an indifferent expression, "There is no need to doubt. I have carefully examined and studied them. They are all super skills of the king level. Every single one of these secret magics can be considered as the most powerful secret magics of our clans." A simple sentence was enough to prove how exquisite and precious the 3 super skills that Ji Tianxing had imparted to them were. The 4 young god kings were ecstatic as if they had been hit by a heaven-shaking prize. They immediately became emotional and their excitement overflowed. However, Nangong Ao was the first to react. His surprise and excitement turned into a helpless and self-mocking smile. 3 sets of supreme-grade king-level ultimate skills? He actually wants us to master them in just 20 days. Does the alliance master have some misunderstanding about us? He can't be thinking that we have heaven-defying comprehension and aptitude like him, right? The other 3 also reacted, and the joy in their hearts disappeared in an instant, and was replaced by a helpless expression. To be honest, the alliance master thinks too highly of us. Although we are listed as the 10 heavenly kings of the younger generation in the boundless heaven continent. But to be honest, in front of the alliance master's standards and requirements, we are just trash. Master these 3 super skills in 20 days? What the hell? It's already amazing that I can understand and memorize it smoothly. They had just been hit by a huge surprise, but in the blink of an eye, they realized that they were too weak to digest this gift. One could imagine how the 4 young god kings felt. Fortunately, Nangong Nihuang saw that they were so depressed and timely enlightened them. Since the alliance master is sure that we can complete it, then we can definitely do it. Everyone, don't worry. Other than the 3 super skills, there are also the alliance master's insights and cultivation experiences in the jade slips. I suggest that everyone first memorize the 3 super skills before learning the alliance master's insights. It should be twice the result with half the effort. The few young god kings hurriedly used their divine senses to explore the jade slips. Indeed, they found that there were a few insights recorded in the jade slips. Instantly, the 4 of them heaved a huge sigh of relief. They revealed expressions of relief and regained their joyful smiles. Phew. The alliance master is so considerate. He almost scared me to death. Look at how useless you are. I was already mentally prepared. If the alliance master says we can do it, then we can definitely do it. We have to do it even if we can't. Brothers, the alliance master has given us such a valuable gift. We can't disappoint the alliance master and we can't embarrass the clan. Alright, don't waste time. Start cultivating in seclusion right away. Chapter 4200. With 3 top-notch techniques, the 4 young divine kings stopped discussing which continent Ji Tianxing was going to attack. Ji Tianxing trusted them so much and had such high hopes for them. He had even given them such a surprise gift. They knew that it would be too embarrassing if they couldn't master 3 divine abilities within 20 days. Most importantly, they would betray the alliance leader's trust and lose to the others. Therefore, without needing Nangong Nihuang to say anything, the 4 of them put away the jade slips and went back to their rooms to cultivate. Nangong Nihuang didn't stay idle either. She also went back to her room and entered the secret room to cultivate. After all, she was a woman. She was more meticulous and better at figuring out Ji Tianqing's thoughts. While the 4 of them were still discussing where Ji Tianqing was going to attack, she already had an answer in her heart. It wasn't the firmament continent, it was the reincarnation island. She also guessed that Ji Tianqing wanted them to master the 3 techniques as soon as possible so that they could go to the reincarnation island to carry out the investigation mission. She had even been thinking about how to help Ji Tianqing during this time. She had been deducing and imagining how she would deploy the attack on the reincarnation island if she was the one planning it. The first step she could think of was to hide after entering the reincarnation island and send out elite experts to scout for information. She had to understand the situation on the reincarnation island and the forces under the command of the god of the underworld before coming up with a plan. The next plan of action could be based on Ji Tianqing's process of conquering the boundless heaven continent. Of course, she would use the name of Kenshin to contact the major ancient clans and top forces on the reincarnation island. No matter what method she used, she would first win over a group of experts and forces to be the foundation of the attack on the reincarnation island. Next, she would attack and subdue the leaders of the various territories on the reincarnation island one by one. When the forces grew stronger, things would become much simpler. Nangong Nihuang deduced the process in steps. After repeated verification, she felt that there shouldn't be much of a deviation. Then she painstakingly deduced the details of every step of the plan, trying to minimize the flaws and omissions. Just like this, she had already unknowingly recorded a large amount of information in the jade slip. If Ji Tianqing asked her to come up with a plan as soon as possible, or the deployment of the attack on the reincarnation island, she only needed to tidy it up a little before presenting it to Ji Tianqing. As for now, she didn't have to think about these questions anymore. After she collected her thoughts, she focused on comprehending the 3 divine abilities. Although she was not as strong as Nangong Ao Zhanwudi and the others, however, she was also very unyielding. She was determined to surpass those 4 fellows and not be looked down upon by them. The deity-slaying battleship kept flying non-stop. After entering the Xiaolong Sea area, it continued to fly southeast. Just as Nangong Nihuang had speculated, the god-slaying battleship's target was the reincarnation island. Even though the battleship had been hurrying along, the interior of the battleship was very quiet. Everyone was focused on cultivating. Only the white dragon was left alone in the cockpit, controlling the battleship alone. Ji Tianqing had already entered the distorted space-time of the divine pagoda to continue cultivating and comprehending the heaven punishment divine technique. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had all suffered some injuries during the battle in the Shura Cave Heaven. In the past 3 months, they had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted space-time. After more than 10 years, their injuries had basically healed. It was worth mentioning that Ji Wuhan's heaven-defying talent and potential were truly displayed after he broke through to the Divine King realm. It had been less than a year since he broke through to the Divine King realm. He had only cultivated in the distorted space-time for more than 30 years. Now he had broken through to the 2nd level of the Divine King realm. With his talent and speed of breakthrough, the miracle of breaking through 1 level per year would probably happen in the next few years. From Ji Tianqing to Baifeng, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Nangong Nihuang and the others to Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang, everyone was working hard to cultivate and become stronger. At this time, the Reincarnation Island, the Firmament Mainland, and the Qiankuan Mainland were in a state of worry, excitement, and anticipation. These 3 mainlands were located in the east, southeast, and south of the Boundless Heaven Mainland respectively. They were the same distance from the Boundless Heaven Mainland. Since a few months ago the news of the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance had spread to these 3 mainlands, many experts and forces had heard the news. Later on, the Rebel Alliance had won successive battles, and the Imperial Tutor was completely helpless. In the end, the Shura God Emperor's clone was killed by the Kenshin. The Imperial Tutor and his army were annihilated, and the entire Boundless Heaven mainland was controlled by the Kenshin. A series of news spread across the 3 mainlands. Not only did the top experts and forces know, but even the common people knew. The bigwigs and territorial lords who controlled the mainlands were naturally worried. They were as anxious as ants on a hot pan, but they did not know what to do. They knew very well that the Kenshin had already publicly announced that they would overthrow the dark reign of the five-god emperor, rescue the five mainlands of the heavenly realm, and let all the people of the heavenly realm regain their freedom. Then they, the god emperor's lackeys, would naturally be the targets of the Kenshin's beating and killing. However, the Kenshin's strength was so terrifying that even the clones of the five-god emperor were killed. Ordinary people like them could only be killed by the Kenshin. After thinking about it, they could not find any way to stop the Kenshin's attack. They could only pray that the Kenshin would attack the other mainlands first and give them a little more time. When the common people of the three mainlands heard this series of news, they were wild with excitement and rushed to spread the news. Their hearts were filled with excitement and anticipation. They naturally hated the dark reign of the five-god emperor, but because of their low status and strength, they could only swallow their anger. Now Kenshin raised his arms and shouted loudly. Heroes gathered and successfully occupied the boundless heaven continent, ending the dark reign of the Azura god emperor. This allowed all the common people to see the hope of escaping the sea of suffering and embracing freedom. Every day they hoped that the Kenshin would arrive on their mainlands as soon as possible, overthrow the god emperor's rule and return their freedom. In this way, the common people of the three mainlands were already praising Kenshin's prowess and praying that he would appear as soon as possible, even before he started attacking the next mainland. If it were any other expert, they might not have such an effect. At the very least, they would not be able to win the respect and worship of hundreds of millions of people of the heavenly realm. It could not be helped. Kenshin's prowess was too great. It could be said that he was a household name in the heavenly realm. Kenshin's noble character was also respected and admired by hundreds of millions of people. The common people of the three mainlands had already regarded him as the savior of the world, the saint who stood on behalf of the Tianxing. On the other side, in the center of the Reincarnation Island, in the sacred and dignified Yudu city, Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison had already gathered the 6 great divine generals and the 18 region lords to discuss countermeasures. In addition, the 9 ancient clans on the Reincarnation Island had also received an invitation from Commander Styx to participate in the discussion on how to deal with the Kenshin's attack. However, only 3 ancient clans were willing to head to Yudu. The other 6 were vague and made excuses. Chapter 4201. The 3 ancient clans that were ordered to rush to Yudu to discuss how to fight against the Kenshin had long pledged allegiance to the god of the underworld. Even if the god of the underworld's true body wasn't on Reincarnation Island, they still had to obey the orders of Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison. The meeting hall of Yudu Divine Palace was brightly lit, and the atmosphere was solemn. Commander Mingi, Marshal Blood Prison, 6 great generals, 18 region masters, and the strong practitioners of the 3 ancient clans were gathered in the hall. The dozens of Divine King strong practitioners in the hall were the most powerful and authoritative rulers of Reincarnation Island. They could mobilize 80% of the strong practitioners and military forces of Reincarnation Island. Logically speaking, with so many strong practitioners united and gathered together to discuss several countermeasures and plans, they should be confident in defending against the Kenshin's attack. However, after an entire day of discussion, they still couldn't decide which plan to execute. No one had the confidence to defend against the Kenshin's possible attack. The only thing that everyone was sure of was that among the Firmament Continent, the Qianquan Continent and the Reincarnation Island, Sword God was most likely to attack the Reincarnation Island. The first reason was that Reincarnation Island had the smallest territory and the weakest power among the 3 continents, making it the easiest to attack. The second reason was that Reincarnation Island was located in the center of the God world. The other 4 continents were located in the northwest, northeast, southeast and southwest directions of Reincarnation Island. The distance from Reincarnation Island to any of the continents wasn't too far. In other words, Reincarnation Island was the core of the God world, the most important continent. As long as he occupied the Reincarnation Island, the Sword God would be able to attack any continent he wished. He would be able to advance or retreat as he wished. Therefore, Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison were very sure that Kenshin would attack Reincarnation Island first. However, the problem was that Kenshin hadn't shown up yet and there was no news about it. No one knew when Kenshin would attack or what method or scheme they would use to attack. Therefore it was difficult for them to take specific precautions. Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison could only make some arrangements to strengthen the defense of Yudu and keep the 18 regions on alert. Originally, the Blood Hell Marshal wanted the 18 domain lords to stay in their respective regions and lead the soldiers to be on guard and strengthen their defenses. However, Commander Mingi suggested that when Kenshin attacked the Boundless Heaven continent, they would attack the regions one by one and force the region masters to surrender. This method made the Imperial Tutor helpless. If they didn't learn their lesson, Kenshin would definitely repeat the same trick and conquer the 18 regions. Therefore, Commander Mingi requested the 18 region masters to stay in Yudu and control their own regions would be controlled remotely. Only a small portion of their opinions to stay would to do so to twos. Those who agreed to stay in Yudu were to their territories were to stay in the region to stay. To be agreed to stay twos to be to stay to give to their territories and to be controlled to be to stay. Of them was to be woods to be safe to as to be to stay. However, their own territories were to be given to the Kenshin. Without them, the soldiers under their command wouldn't be able to defend against the Kenshin's attack. Commander Mingi refuted them on the spot. Even if they stayed to guard their own territories, they wouldn't be able to defend against the Kenshin's attack. Many of the region masters were choked to the point that they couldn't refute, and their expressions turned ugly. Although they didn't say anything, they were still unconvinced and muttered to themselves, "Even if we stay in Yudu, can we really fight against the Kenshin? Even if all of us work together, I'm afraid we won't be able to defeat the Kenshin, right?" Seeing that the region masters were speechless, Marshal Blood Prison couldn't say anything more. He could only follow Commander Mingi's suggestion and let the 18 region masters stay in Yudu. However, each region master could transfer a portion of their loyal soldiers to Yudu to set up defenses. This way these region masters would have soldiers under their command. Only then would they feel safe and be willing to compromise. Commander Mingi agreed to this suggestion, but he also raised a condition. That was to bring the families of each region master to Yudu. In name it was to protect the families of the region masters. After all, Yudu City was safer. However, in reality, this was also a disguised form of coercion to force the region masters to listen to orders. In the end, Commander Mingi decided on a countermeasure in a domineering manner and ended the meeting. After the meeting ended, everyone started to move. They had to take advantage of the time before the Kenshin arrived at Reincarnation Island to complete the corresponding deployment and defense. 20 days passed in a flash. That evening, the god-slaying battleships silently landed on Reincarnation Island without attracting anyone's attention. At this time, Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for close to 3 years. His abilities had improved greatly again. Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Yuchipo, Lon Kai, Zhan Wudi, and the others also ended their seclusion. These 5 young divine kings all completed the tasks that Ji Tianxing had given them within the time limit. They used 18 to 20 days to master the 3 divine arts that Ji Tianxing had given them. Nangong Ao and Lon Kai, who were the most talented, only used 18 days to master them. Yuchipo and Nangong Nihuang used 19 days. While Zhan Wudi used exactly 20 days. When the 5 young divine kings walked out of the secret chamber and met in the meeting hall, Ji Tianxing also appeared. When he saw that the 5 young divine kings had completed their tasks, he smiled with relief. In fact, this was also a test that he had given them to test their talents and aptitudes. The results were gratifying. The 5 young divine kings were all outstanding, 1 in a million geniuses. After the 2 sides greeted each other, Ji Tianxing said to everyone, "Very good. I am very pleased that all of you have mastered the 3 divine arts within the time limit. It just so happens that we have landed on Reincarnation Island today. Immediately, you will be able to use the newly mastered divine arts to complete a very important task. I'm sure you've already guessed my intentions when you're cultivating those 3 divine abilities and consummate skills. That's right. Your task is to disguise yourself and sneak into the various regions of Reincarnation Island to investigate the situation and news of each region. We have no informants on Reincarnation Island, nor do we have any forces or soldiers that we can use. Therefore, you must understand the deployment and movements of Reincarnation Island and investigate which ancient clans and forces might be of use to us. I will keep in touch with all of you at all times, and according to your feedback, I will deploy the tasks according to the situation. It is very likely that you will use the newly mastered divine arts to complete some assassination tasks. How about it? Does it sound very dangerous and exciting? Nangong Ni Huang Zhan Wudi, and the others were full of anticipation and nodded in agreement. Ji Tianqing asked again, "Then do you have the courage to attempt this difficult task?" Everyone was excited. They rubbed their hands together, eager to give it a try. They shouted in unison, "Of course." Chapter 4202. The first day the god-slaying battleship landed on Reincarnation Island. In the evening, Nangong Ni Huang was the first to leave the battleship and sneak into the cold moon domain to gather information. She used the divine arts and secret techniques that Ji Tianqing taught her to change her appearance and aura. She completely hid her true face and started her operation in the cold moon domain. Her target was the cold moon domain and another region next to it. She needed to investigate the situation within 10 days. Among the 5 young god kings, she was the weakest as she was a mid-level god king. Therefore Ji Tianqing took good care of her. Before she left, he gave her a king-level high-grade life-saving divine weapon. The god-slaying battleship continued forward. In the evening of the second day, Nangong Ao left the battleship in the Heavenly Jewel region. He also used his divine arts and secret techniques to change his appearance and aura. He started his operation in the Heavenly Jewel region. His target was the Heavenly Jewel region and the 3 surrounding regions. In the morning of the 4th day, Zhan Wudi left the god-slaying battleship in the White Lotus region and started his operation. His mission was the same as Nangong Ao's. He needed to investigate the situation in 4 regions. In the next few days, Lon Kai and Yuchi Pa also left the god-slaying battleship and entered the designated regions to start their operations. The 2 young god kings each had to investigate 4 regions. In this way, the 5 god kings were in charge of investigating 18 regions. As long as they successfully completed their missions, Ji Tianqing would be able to grasp the situation of the entire Reincarnation Island. In the end, the god-slaying battleship went to Yudu. Ji Tianqing wanted to sneak into Yudu and personally investigate the situation there. Decades ago, when he left the god world for the dragon realm, he went through the spacetime tunnel of Reincarnation Island. At that time, he stirred up a storm on Reincarnation Island and created chaos. He even fought with many strong practitioners. He used a series of schemes to deceive many God King's strong practitioners in Yudu and sneaked into the Creation Divine Palace to steal the Creation Divine Pearl. Yun Yao obtained the Creation Divine Pearl and gathered the 7 Divine Pearls. Her 3 souls and 7 spirits returned, and she obtained all of Goddess Yaoguang's memories and inheritance. She successfully broke through to the God King realm. Even though it had been many years, when Ji Tianqing came to Yudu again, he couldn't help thinking about what had happened back then. After disguising himself, he turned into an ordinary middle-aged man of the god race. He stood outside the gates of Yudu City and thought to himself, the Fortune Divine Palace has been destroyed, and the space-time altar under the abyss of reincarnation is also damaged. He wondered if they had been able to repair it after so many years. With Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison's intelligence, they must have guessed that I would come to attack Reincarnation Island. I wonder how they would react. I'm afraid they don't have any good countermeasures and can only gather all the region masters and strong practitioners to hide in Yudu City and wait for me to appear. Yudu City in the evening was very quiet, and the atmosphere was even a little heavy. There were 4 gates in the north, south, east and west, but only the south gate was open. The other 3 gates were closed. Moreover, there was only a narrow passageway at the south city gate, which was only wide enough for 1 horse carriage to pass through. Inside and outside the city gates, there were also 200 elite guards standing guard. They were all Divine Lord Realm experts. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that there were actually 10 Divine King Realm experts hidden among them. Through this point, Ji Tianqing could conclude that Yudu City was definitely heavily guarded and jittery at the slightest sound. It was probably because the commoners in the city had also felt the unusual aura of danger, so they didn't enter or leave the city. Occasionally 1 or 2 commoners would leave the city, but they would also undergo strict interrogation and inspection. Ji Tianqing observed for a moment more and discovered that the defensive formation of Yudu City had also been activated. There were also 2 small-scale god formations at the city gates that were in an operating state. In this way, if there was any abnormality at the city gates, they could immediately seal it off with the formation. Luckily, when Ji Tianxing landed outside the city gates, he had already changed his appearance and concealed his aura. He even entered a state of invisibility. Even though he stood at the gates for 100 breaths of time, no one discovered him. After roughly understanding the situation in Yudu, he walked towards the city gates. The guards and Divine King Realm experts guarding the city gates all stood on the spot with stern expressions. Without seeing anyone enter or leave the city gates, they naturally wouldn't move around casually. As a result, when Ji Tianxing walked past them, the distance between them was less than 6 feet. Yet he wasn't discovered. The 2 king-level high-grade god formations at the city gates also couldn't detect Ji Tianxing's presence and didn't send out any alarms. In this way, Ji Tianxing easily entered Yudu City. Under the setting sun, Yudu City still looked the same as before. The city was majestic and vast. The streets in the city were straight and wide, crisscrossing and dividing the huge city into countless regions. In every square region, there were rows upon rows of palaces and residences, giving off a dignified and imposing aura. However, at this moment Yudu City was completely silent. It was no longer as bustling as before. There were no pedestrians on the streets. There were only scattered yellow leaves, making it look very desolate. The shops on the streets were all tightly shut and no sound could be heard. The entire Yudu City seemed very quiet, as if it was an empty city. However, that wasn't the case. After Ji Tianxing used his consciousness to investigate, he discovered that in every palace and residence, there were hundreds or even thousands of commoners. However, those commoners were all hiding in underground palaces or secret chambers. They were either meditating quietly or cultivating in seclusion. It was obvious that the commoners knew what was about to happen. However, they didn't escape Yudu. Instead, they stayed and hid, waiting for the arrival of danger. After all, in the entire Reincarnation Island, Yudu was the safest. It didn't take long for night to fall. Ji Tianxing, who was in an invisible state, walked around Yudu City casually, carefully investigating the situation in the city. For an entire night he completely investigated Yudu City, which had a radius of 1,000 miles. He was very clear about the layout of the buildings in the city, the distribution of the 100,000 soldiers, and the grades and numbers of the various formations. There were no secrets in the entire Yudu City in front of him. He studied it thoroughly. The facts proved that Yudu City was indeed in a state of extreme alert. Its defense was more than 5 times stronger than usual. Not only were there 100,000 elite soldiers gathered in the city, but there were also 100,000 city guards and more than 5,000 Divine Lord Realm experts. As for Divine King Realm experts, there were more than 200 of them, and most of them were gathered in the Divine Palace in the center of the city. The Reincarnation Divine Palace was the core of Yudu City and also the sacred ground of Reincarnation Island. The palace complex with a radius of 50 miles was the residence of Commander Mingyi and Marshal Blood Prison, and its defense was the tightest. A total of 50,000 elite soldiers and 3,000 Divine Lord Realm experts guarded the Reincarnation Divine Palace day and night. In order not to alert the enemy, Ji Tianxing didn't rashly release his consciousness to investigate the situation in the Reincarnation Divine Palace. He was preparing to sneak into the Reincarnation Divine Palace to personally investigate and set up defenses. At this moment, Nangong Nihuang sent him a message to report the results of her investigation. Chapter 4203. Reporting to Alliance Master. After 8 days of searching and investigating, Ni Huang did not let you down and finally obtained the results. Cold Moon and Green Star domains are tight on the outside but loose on the inside. They seem to be in a state of panic and fear. In fact, most of the soldiers and generals left behind are of the middle and lower ranks. Their abilities are weak and there is nothing to fear. Half of the god generals, commanders and deputy generals are missing. We suspect that they have left the domains and are gathered in Yudu City. In addition, Ni Huang took the risk to sneak into the Domain Master's manor and didn't find any traces of the Domain Master. I suspect that I have entered Yudu under orders. If Alliance Master wants to take down Cold Moon and Green Star domains, Ni Huang estimates that you will be able to do so within 3 days. Nangong Nihuang sent a message to Ji Tianxing. The report was brief but clear and straightforward. Simply put, the 2 domains that she was ordered to investigate seemed to be heavily guarded, but in fact the morale of the army was lax and they didn't have much combat power. After all, those left behind were all of the middle and lower ranks. The high-end combat power and strong practitioners were nowhere to be seen. They had probably been transferred to Yudu City. Even the domain masters of the 2 domains weren't around. One could imagine that the soldiers left behind didn't have much cohesion, let alone morale. If Ji Tianxing wanted to take down those 2 domains, he could do so in 3 days at most. It would be effortless. Nangong Nihuang's report just happened to confirm Ji Tianxing's guess. No wonder the defense of Yudu City had been strengthened by more than 5 times. Other than the 100,000 city guards, there were also 100,000 elite soldiers and 5,000 Divine Lord Realm experts. It turned out that those were all forces transferred from various domains. From the looks of it, it's just as I guessed. Commander Mingyi and Marshal Blood Prison know that I will break through the various domains one by one before finally besieging Yudu City. In order to prevent the various domains from falling one after another, they mobilized the domain masters and elite experts of the various domains to Yudu City. By doing so, they can increase their chances of winning. At the very least, they can defend Yudu City for a few more days. However, those 18 domains have given up in disguise. Commander Mingyi and Marshal Blood Prison made this decision for the sake of the overall situation. I wonder what those domain masters think. These thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind and he couldn't help but sneer. Then he sent a message to Nangong Nihuang, telling her to continue hiding in the realm of Cold Moon and be on standby. Since Ji Tianxing was 80% sure that the 18 region lords and their elites were all gathered in Yudu City and in the Reincarnation Divine Palace, Ji Tianxing didn't care. In that case, there was no need for him to enter the Samsara Divine Palace alone to investigate the situation. After all, he didn't plan to face Commander Styx, Marshal Bloodhell and the others yet, and he wouldn't fight them right away. He hid himself in Yudu City and continued to investigate. He carefully studied the city protection formation and defensive formation of Yudu City, deducing the route of the enemy's troops. 3 days later, he finished studying all of this and started to study the important locations near Yudu City. For example, there were several underground palaces hidden deep underground, as well as 2 mysterious altars and formations. He had to be fully prepared in case Commander Nether River, the Blood Prison Marshal, and the others came up with some tricks through the hidden underground palaces, altars and grand spell formations. In addition, the Abyss of Reincarnation and the passageway between the 2 worlds were also targets he had to investigate. He had to be on guard against Commander Nether River and the others repairing the spacetime altar and the passageway between the 2 worlds. In the future, if Commander Nether River and the others led the army through the passageway between the 2 worlds and escaped to the Dragon Realm, it would be troublesome. During this time, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lon Kai, Yuchi Pa, and the others also sent him messages one after another reporting the situation to him. The 4 young god kings risked their lives and the results of their investigation were similar to Nangong Nihuang's. The various regions were the same. They seemed to be heavily guarded and had used all of their troops to defend. But in reality, the soldiers guarding the various regions were all mid-level and low-level soldiers. Those god generals, commanders and other high-end combat forces had all gathered in Yudu City with their domain lords. As a result, the 18 regions were in a state of weak defense and empty military forces. Ji Tianxing could be completely sure that many domain lords and experts were gathered in Yudu City, waiting to have a decisive battle with him. However, in the 4 young god kings' reports, there were a few very important pieces of information that allowed Ji Tianxing to see a breakthrough. The most powerful forces on Reincarnation Island were the 18 domain lords and the 9 great ancient clans. As early as a month ago, Commander Nether River and the Blood Prison Marshal had issued an order to gather the domain lords and ancient clans in Yudu City. The 18 domain lords were naturally acting on orders. Not only did they bring the elite experts under their command, but even their families were also brought to Yudu City. But what was interesting was that among the 9 great ancient clans, only 3 were completely loyal to the god of the underworld. The moment they received the order, they rushed to Yudu City. As for the other 6 ancient clans, they used all kinds of reasons and excuses to shirk responsibility and refused to gather in Yudu City. Just 5 days ago, one of the ancient clans could not withstand the repeated persuasion and threats of Commander Nether River and the Blood Prison Marshal. He had no choice but to lead his elite experts and rush to Yudu City. As a result, Commander Mingi had the support of 4 ancient clans under his command. The other 5 ancient clans were still bitterly holding on, dealing with the repeated threats of the Blood Prison Marshal. No one knew what kind of tricks and schemes the Blood Prison Marshal and Commander Nether River would use to force the ancient clans to surrender. No one knew how long the 5 ancient clans could hold on. But one thing was for sure. The fact that the 5 ancient clans were unwilling to head to Yudu City proved that they were disloyal. To Commander Nether River and the rest, this was disloyalty. But to Ji Tianxing, this was a breakthrough. As a result, after Ji Tianxing received this information, he made a prompt decision to leave Yudu City and pay a visit to the 5 ancient clans. Although he did not need the support of the 5 ancient clans to successfully take over Reincarnation Island, there was a huge problem. There would definitely be a huge battle and there would definitely be tragic casualties on his side. Therefore he had to think of a way to subdue the 5 ancient clans for his own use. Only then could he reduce the casualties and take over Reincarnation Island more easily. The key was that after he took over Reincarnation Island, he would need to appoint new domain lords and commanders to firmly control Reincarnation Island. He could not leave Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, and the rest behind to be domain lords of Reincarnation Island. Therefore the 5 ancient clans were the best candidates. After finding a breakthrough, Ji Tianxing's plan to take over Reincarnation Island was confirmed, and he officially began his operation. 2 days' journey away from Yudu City, there was an ancient pine grotto heaven in Cypress Pine region. It was the territory of the Pine Crane clan. According to Yuchi Po's report, the Blood Prison Marshal's messenger seemed to be in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. He had been negotiating with the Pine Crane clan for a few days, but there was no conclusion yet. Therefore, Ji Tianxing made the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven his first target. Chapter 4204. Ji Tianxing quietly left Yudu and rode the god-slaying battleship to Cypress Pine region. The estimated 2-day journey with the god-slaying battleship's normal flying speed arrived at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven on the 3rd night. When he was still tens of thousands of miles away from ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing put away the god-slaying battleship and concealed his aura. The entrance to the Grotto Heaven was at the peak of a towering mountain that was 3,000 feet tall. It was surrounded by lofty mountains and steep ridges with ancient pine trees. The peak of the mountain was flattened, and a plaza with a radius of 30 miles was built. It was paved with incomparably hard Qinggang divine stone. The array at the entrance was an altar. There were over 100 guards standing guard in the surroundings, and there were 4 God King experts in the lead. It could be seen that the guards had solemn expressions and murderous auras. They were very vigilant and alert. At this moment, Ji Tianxing was faced with 2 choices. He could either show himself openly and state his intentions. Since the Pine Crane clan refused to submit to Commander Mingi, they were most likely waiting for his arrival and wanted to follow him to overthrow the rule of the god of the underworld. Or perhaps the Pine Crane clan believed that he could kill Commander Mingi and the others and successfully take over Reincarnation Island, so they wanted to follow him to reap the fruits of victory. No matter what the Pine Crane clan was thinking, they should be very welcoming of his arrival. The second choice was to wait for an opportunity and quietly sneak into ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. If he cast spells to break the formation at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven, it would definitely alarm the guards. After some consideration, Ji Tianxing decided to wait patiently for a moment and look for an opportunity. The night was dark and the cold wind was rustling. Ji Tianxing originally thought that with Reincarnation Island's current tense and alert situation, no one would enter Reincarnation Island at this time. He didn't expect that something unexpected would happen. He waited for about 2 hours, and in the night sky not far away, there was a divine light speeding toward him. When he got closer, he could see that it was a divine ship carved with special patterns and emblems that represented a certain power. Ji Tianxing observed it carefully and frowned. Then he remembered that it seemed to be the emblem of Commander Mingi. In this special period, Commander Mingi must be guarding Yudu, so it was almost impossible for him to come to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Therefore, the people in the divine worship were most likely divine generals or messengers under Commander Mingi's command. The result was just as he expected. The divine ship stopped at the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Two God King powerhouses in shining armor walked out of the divine ship with their heads held high. Behind the two God Kings was a group of guards in golden armor. There were 20 of them. This group of people walked to the entrance of ancient Pine Paradise with an arrogant and bossy attitude. A captain among the guards immediately shouted in a dignified tone, "Great Commander Mingi's messenger is here. Pine Crane Clan, hurry up and welcome him." The guards guarding the entrance of the Grotto Heaven were already on high alert when they saw the arrival of the divine warship. After seeing the person's attire and hearing what he said, a look of disgust appeared in his eyes. Obviously, the Pine Crane Clan hated the messenger of Commander Mingi very much. However, due to many reasons they could not show their disgust, let alone resist by force. No matter how unwilling the captain of the Pine Crane Clan was, he could only lead the guards to bow and salute. "Greetings to Lord Messenger." The 100 guards saluted in a standard manner, but there was no sense of respect. Instead, there was some reluctance. However, the two messengers did not take it to heart. They only said with a cold face, "Hurry up and open the passage. I want to see Patriarch Pine Crane and pass on Great Commander Mingi's orders." The two captains of the Pine Crane clan had probably received orders from their clan long ago. They were stalling for time as much as possible. As a result, the two captains were rambling and trying to change the topic. They were stalling for time with the two messengers. They were unwilling to open the formation at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. The two messengers saw through the clues. Their faces became even colder and their attitudes became even more forceful and fierce. They repeatedly threatened and coerced the other party to open the entrance. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but frown. He thought to himself, "There's already a group of Commander Mingi's messengers that entered ancient Pine Paradise a few days ago to negotiate with the patriarchs of the Pine Crane clan. Several days have passed and there's still no result. The second group of messengers has rushed over. I don't know what they're here for, but they've been blocked outside by the Pine Crane clan. Could it be that the negotiations between the first group of messengers and the Pine Crane clan have collapsed? The second group of messengers must have brought the fury of Commander Mingi to threaten the Pine Crane clan?" Thinking like this, it meant that the Pine Crane clan had not compromised. Xianxia felt more confident. The two captains of the Pine Crane clan had been in a deadlock with the messengers for a long time. In the end, they had angered the two messengers. They had almost drawn their swords and killed them. The Pine Crane clan was certainly unwilling to shed all pretenses of cordiality and start a war with Commander Mingi during this special period. As a result, the two captains of the guards could only restrain their fury and were forced to open the entrance of the Grotto Heaven. The two messengers assumed a victorious posture. They led their subordinates and swaggered through the spatial gate, entering ancient Pine Paradise. The Pine Crane clan's guards were so angry that their eyes were about to spit fire. They gnashed their teeth and glared at the messengers, but there was nothing they could do. It was not until the messengers had entered ancient Pine Paradise and the guards had closed the grand array of the Grotto Heaven's entrance that they began to discuss and curse with righteous indignation. "Commander Mingi's lackeys have really gone too far. These guys are so snobbish and arrogant. They're really hateful. It's said that the Kenshin is about to reach Reincarnation Island. These guys won't live for long." "Shut up. How can you say such things? Anyway, it's something that everyone knows. There are no outsiders here. What's wrong with saying it? The first group of messengers is still here. The second group of messengers is rushing over. I'm afraid that Commander Mingi is going to do something bad again. I'm really worried that the Patriarch and Elders won't be able to withstand the pressure and will yield to Commander Mingi." "Don't worry. This is a major event that concerns the life and future of our Pine Crane clan. How can the Patriarch make a mistake? The example of the boundless heaven continent is right in front of us. Unless the true body of the god of the underworld returns, who can stop the Kenshin's attack? Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal have no choice but to fight to the death. But our Pine Crane clan can't make a mistake." Obviously, the ordinary disciples and guards of the Pine Crane clan all knew how to choose. Their stance was very firm. From this, it could be seen what kind of mentality the Pine Crane clan had. On the other side, the two messengers led the team and flew across the sky at lightning speed. They rushed toward the depths of ancient Pine Paradise. Along the way, the two messengers were also discussing with gloomy expressions. They cursed the guards guarding the grotto heaven's entrance. They really didn't know what was good for them and deserved to die. The 20 accompanying guards nodded repeatedly and did not forget to take the opportunity to flatter them. However, they had never imagined that the expert that caused them to be extremely anxious and terrified was silently following behind them. Chapter 4205. To the Pine Crane Clan, the second batch of messengers was an uninvited guest that was annoying. However, to Xianxia it was an opportunity and a breakthrough. If the second batch of messengers had not arrived in time, it would have been difficult for him to sneak into ancient Pine Grotto Heaven without alerting anyone. He followed the second batch of messengers and flew across the night sky, heading straight for the depths of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Along the way, he could see the beautiful scenery of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. However, it was late at night and it was quiet all around. There were no disciples of the Pine Crane clan. Presumably, under such a tense atmosphere, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan were not in the mood to come out and play. At the same time, in the depths of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, there was a group of palaces that were lit up in the middle of the night. More than 100 magnificent palaces stood on top of more than 40 mountain peaks. They were arranged in picturesque disorder, forming a natural heaven and earth formation. This was the residence of the Pine Crane clan. The most majestic palace in the middle was the Pine Crane Palace. At this moment, the door of the main hall of the Pine Crane Palace was wide open. The main hall was brightly lit and dazzling. In the magnificent main hall, the Pine Crane clan leader sat on the gilded throne at the head of the hall. He was leaning on the wide back of the chair and holding his chin with one hand. He was in a daze. The clan leader was already over 26,000 years old. His strength had reached the later stage of the 9th level Divine King realm. He was only one step away from the peak Divine King realm. It was a pity that he had been stuck in this realm for over 8,000 years. Without exceptional talent, aptitude, comprehension, and amazing opportunities and treasures, it would be difficult for him to become a peak divine king in his life. This thin and skinny old man always liked to wear simple green clothes and black cloth shoes. He also wore a simple and old bamboo hat that had gone through the vicissitudes of life. He had a head full of gray and white sparse hair, but it was combed meticulously every day. His face was thin and his eyes were sunken. However, his eyes were clear and sharp. He always had a goatee. Judging from his appearance, the Pine Crane clan leader was not a flexible person. He was a stubborn and even paranoid old man. And that was indeed the case. In the main hall that was brightly lit, there were two high-level divine kings sitting on the two sides of the main hall. They were both wearing brocade clothes and luxurious divine crowns. With one look, one could tell that they were powerful and influential practitioners from Yudu. These two were the first batch of messengers sent by Commander Styx. They had arrived at ancient Pine Grotto 5 days ago. Over the past 5 days, the two messengers had to negotiate with Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders of the Pine Crane clan in the main hall for a very long time. The two messengers tried every possible way to persuade Patriarch Xianxia, using both the carrot and the stick. However, they were still unable to change Patriarch Xianxia's mind, nor could they change Patriarch Xianxia's decision. The two of them had racked their brains and exhausted their mouths, but to no avail. Until today, both sides had lost their patience and were on the verge of fighting each other on the spot. But even then, Patriarch Xianxia still acted like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water. He simply slumped on the throne and pretended to be in deep thought and rest with his eyes closed. The two messengers were completely helpless. They could only drink their tea with a black face. Behind the two of them, the 20 guards that accompanied them stood carefully. They didn't dare to make a single sound. The elders of the Pine Crane clan sat on the two large chairs on the left and right sides. Although they were accompanying the two messengers, the two sides had already reached an agreement. However, the negotiations between the two sides had already broken down. They sat there calmly, either closing their eyes to rest or quietly drinking tea. No one spoke a word. And the turning point of the situation was that the second batch of messengers sent by Commander Styx was about to arrive. As early as a few hours ago, the two messengers from the first batch received news that the second batch of messengers was about to arrive to deliver Commander Styx's latest orders. Although this made them feel like they were not trusted and were about to be abandoned, this was Commander Styx's decision. But this was Commander Styx's decision. They could only silently accept it. They had no right to object. After thinking it through, the two messengers felt a sense of relief. Since Commander Styx had sent the second batch of messengers to deal with Patriarch Song He, there was nothing for them to do. Therefore, both sides remained silent and quietly waited for the second batch of messengers to arrive. Time passed silently. Half an hour went by quickly. At this moment, a hazy divine light in the distant night sky was rapidly approaching. In just a few breaths, the divine light enveloped more than 20 figures and landed on the square outside the main hall. After the divine light dispersed, the two messengers and 20 golden armored guards were revealed. Seeing this, the two messengers and 20 guards in the main hall stood up and walked out of the main hall to welcome the arrival of their colleagues. Even if the two sides had the same power, status, and rank in ancient Pine Grotto heaven, colleagues had to give face and show off. Because this represented Commander Styx's prestige. Since the two messengers walked out of the main hall with the guards, Patriarch Song He and the elders could no longer close their eyes and rest. They didn't want to submit to Commander Styx, but they couldn't openly rebel and challenge Commander Styx's prestige and bottom line. Otherwise, before Sword God could attack Reincarnation Island, the enraged Commander Nether River would make an example out of the Pine Crane tribe. One had to know that other than the Pine Crane clan, there were 4 other ancient clans that were also weighing the pros and cons. If the Pine Crane clan became the target of Commander Styx's prestige, it would be too unfair. Not long after, Patriarch Song He led a few elders to the square unhurriedly. At this moment, the two batches of messengers had already greeted each other. Patriarch Song He and a few other elders also stepped forward unwillingly to pay their respects to the second batch of messengers. In fact, both sides' attitudes were obvious. Even if the second batch of messengers came to persuade him, Patriarch Song He wouldn't compromise. However, both sides hadn't fallen out with each other yet, so the Pine Crane clan still had to put on a show. Unexpectedly, the two new messengers didn't even bother to put on a show. After Patriarch Song He and the others bowed, the two arrogant messengers started to make things difficult in public with gloomy faces. How dare you, Song He Tao? You've repeatedly disobeyed Commander Styx's orders and disobeyed His Majesty the God Emperor's decree. Your crimes are unforgivable and should be punished. The burly messenger on the left had a gloomy expression. His tone was fierce and he released a powerful aura. The messenger on the right also took out a noble golden silk. After unfolding it, he read aloud, "Those who see Commander Styx's orders are like seeing Commander Styx himself. Why aren't you kneeling and saluting?" Obviously, this golden silk was an order written by Commander Styx himself. It represented Commander Styx's personal arrival. The messengers present hurriedly knelt and saluted. Patriarch Song He frowned with an ugly expression. The other elders looked at each other and had a bad premonition in their hearts. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.